Our story begins with a man who has just become the Ming Emperor, Chongzhen. Within 3 minutes, he discovers in horror that Li Ziqing is already closing in on Jiuyong Pass. Once that pass falls, Beijing will be completely defenseless. Facing such a disastrous start, he can barely keep his composure. And who could blame him, really? With less than a month left before the Ming dynasty collapses, he falls into a deep, silent contemplation. After some time, a eunuch in a red python robe appears from outside the hall. The man runs in and collapses to his knees with a heavy thud. "Your Majesty, disaster has struck." He slowly opens his eyes, and we see the man before him. This middle-aged eunuch is Wang Qingjin, one of the emperor's most trusted advisors. In the history we know, after Chongzhen's tragic end, Wang would be the one to find him. He would eventually take the emperor's body down and then take his own life, a level of loyalty that is rare indeed. He steadies his mind and tells the man not to panic. Wang Qingjin is pale, his voice trembling as he explains that there are 3 urgent matters to discuss. To be honest, none of them sound particularly pleasant. An urgent report has arrived from Xuanfu. The rebels broke through the defenses late last night and are now marching directly toward the capital. General Wang Qingying has defected to the enemy, while Governor Zhu Jifeng and Supervisor Du Sun have taken their own lives. Wang Qingjin pauses for a moment. Seeing no reaction on the emperor's face, he continues. Tang Tong, the Count of Dingxi, has arrived with his troops and is currently waiting outside the palace for orders. Along with him is the supervisor Du Zhixi. Furthermore, the governor of Tianjin, Feng Yuanyang, has sent a messenger with a highly confidential letter. Wang Qingjin remains on his knees, holding the letter high above his head. He doesn't take it immediately. Instead, he frowns as he weighs these 3 developments. Among these 3 reports, there is one piece of bad news, one good, and one that sits somewhere in the middle. The bad news is the fall of Xuanfu. Now, the only thing standing between Li Ziqing and the capital is Jiuyong Pass. With fewer than 2,000 guards, that pass is as good as gone. The good news, however, lies within this secret letter. He already has a fair idea of what it says, but he opens the envelope anyway to confirm his suspicions. As expected, the contents match history perfectly. The letter warns that the rebels are approaching and the capital's defenses are far too weak to hold them back. It mentions that 100 sea vessels have been prepared, along with 1,000 guards, all stationed and ready at Tongzhou. Feng Yuanyang, fearing the capital cannot be saved, is begging Chongzhen to flee to Yingtianfu. It was a desperate plan for a desperate time. As for Tang Tong's arrival, that is the neutral news. Back in early March, the emperor had urgently summoned several generals to defend the heart of the empire. This included Wu Sangui from Liaodong, Governor Wang Yongji, Tang Tong, and Lu Ziqing. They were meant to be the final shield for the capital. He had also called on the officials in the capital to donate to the cause. Among those summoned, Wu Sangui and Wang Yongji were traveling together. They were leading 300,000 soldiers and civilians from Liaodong, but by March 22nd, they had only reached Yutian. That was still 100 kilometers away, far too late to save the emperor. Tang Tong arrived quickly, but he surrendered just as fast. As soon as Li Ziqing reached Jiuyong Pass, the supervisor Du Zhixi opened the gates. Tang Tong gave up immediately, and his 8,000 men surrendered. General Lu Ziqing was even worse, flatly refusing the emperor's summons. He tossed the secret letter to Wang Qingjin, looking at his most trusted advisor. He slowly asked Wang what he thought of the plan to flee to Yingtianfu. The eunuch, trembling, claimed he didn't dare speak his mind. After being promised a pardon for any offense, Wang Qingjin swallowed hard. He admitted that he believed fleeing south was actually the best option. He explained that in his role as commander of the 9 gates, he had met with Governor Li Guozhen earlier that morning. We learned that of the 80,000 men supposedly in the capital's camps, many were gone or existed only on paper due to corruption. Fewer than 30,000 men were actually available, and most were old or disabled. To be honest, the capital was effectively defenseless. Wang Qingjin finally gathered the courage to speak the truth. Rather than staying to defend Beijing, he suggested they move to Yingtianfu. As long as the emperor survived, the Ming dynasty would endure. As he spoke, cold sweat began to bead on Wang Qingjin's forehead. Under normal circumstances, he would never have dared to say this. But with the rebels closing in, it would soon be too late. He kowtowed repeatedly, begging the emperor to move south, but the emperor only shook his head in disagreement. "I cannot leave," he said firmly. Wang Qingjin was so distressed he nearly burst into tears, but the emperor didn't doubt his loyalty. He shook his head and explained that the capital was crawling with rebel spies. If word of their flight got out, the city would collapse into chaos. Li Ziqing would only need to send a small unit of elite cavalry toward Shandong to intercept them by land. They could also head to sea to cut off the escape route. At that point, the emperor would have nowhere left to run. He would be left with nothing to defend. Wang Qingjin realized then just how ignorant and reckless his suggestion had been. Even a successful escape would mean handing Beijing to the rebels. And then there was the matter of Wu Sangui's forces. Wu Sangui was trapped between the Manchus to the north and the rebels to the south. Could he really avoid surrendering? The Guaning army was the Ming's last elite force. The emperor had no intention of handing them over. He didn't want to explain much, but he felt Wang Qingjin lacked the strategic vision needed for a true advisor. To be honest, the man needed more training. Wang Qingjin wiped the sweat from his brow and started to speak, but he couldn't bring himself to finish his thought. He simply didn't dare say it out loud. He told himself the emperor was the son of heaven and would surely be safe. The emperor closed his eyes to think. We see the weight of the world on his shoulders. Enemies were everywhere, Manchus in the northeast, Mongols in the north, and rebels tearing through the central plains. Land was being seized, the treasury was empty, and the government was paralyzed by infighting and corruption. It was, quite frankly, a total disaster. After a long silence, he finally opened his eyes and stood up. He ordered Wang Qingjin to prepare to take down some very specific names. Wang Qingjin signaled a young eunuch, who quickly brought in a tray with writing brushes and ink for the task. With his hands behind his back, the emperor began to list men, starting with Yin Yingyuan, a native of Tongzhou currently serving as a clerk in Jiangyin. He then added the name of Chun Mingyu to the list, his voice steady and cold. Wang Qingjin, he said, turning to his loyal servant, I have specific orders for you to carry out immediately. As Wang Qingjin walked out, he couldn't help but wonder. Wu Mingming and Li Ruoyan were the top leaders of the Jinyui secret police, and Wang Zhixing led the Eastern Depot. Why would the emperor summon the heads of both spy agencies? He wondered if the emperor was planning a purge. After a brief pause, Wang Qingjin quickened his pace, thinking that a few executions might be exactly what these treacherous officials deserved. But then he worried if killing officials while rebels were at the gates was wise. He quickly dismissed the thought. The emperor surely had his reasons. He told himself to stop worrying and just focus on his own duties. Not long after, Wang Qingjin returned to the emperor's side to report. He announced that Commander Wu, Vice Commander Li, and Director Wang were all waiting outside. The emperor told him to bring them in at once. He also mentioned that Tang Tong and Du Zhizhi were seeking an audience. The emperor realized he had nearly forgotten about that particular matter. He decided to see them all together. Tang Tong, recently titled the Count of Dingxi, stood outside in his formal red Qilin robes. He was glancing around nervously, and when he saw the heads of the secret police, his heart sank. This was never a good sign, was it? We see him wondering what they want. In a single moment, he recalled every bad deed he'd ever done, wondering if the emperor was about to strike him down. At that thought, Tang Tong felt a wave of regret. He shouldn't have come to the capital, much less to the palace to ask for rewards. Since Zhongzhen ascended, the fate of officials had been grim, and for military commanders, it was even worse. In the second year of Zhongzhen's reign, Governor Yuan Chongwan had saved the capital only to be executed by 1,000 cuts the following year. Then, in the fourth year, Sun Qingzong was dismissed from office and eventually died in battle. By the fifth year, Sun Yuanhua had been tried and beheaded. In the 14th year, Zheng Chongjian met the same fate. And in the 16th year, Sun Chuanting was rushed into battle by a series of imperial decrees, only to fall in a crushing defeat. Tang Tong wanted to run, but the guards made that impossible. Realizing there was no escape, he kept his head low and followed Wang Qingjin into the Great Hall to perform his formal bows. He wished the emperor a long life, and Zhongzhen told him to rise. Count of Dingxi, why have you come? The emperor asked, knowing full well the answer. At this point, Tang Tong had no choice but to be honest. He explained he was there to collect military pay and to offer his thanks. His 8,000 soldiers hadn't been paid in 5 months. As a force defending the capital, they needed something, or a mutiny was almost certain. The emperor offered a faint smile, a rare sight, and asked how much he wanted. Tang Tong's mind raced. He knew the treasury was empty, so what did this mean? Was it a warning not to ask for money? But if there was no pay, how were 8,000 men supposed to eat or drink? After a long silence, Tang Tong suppressed his fear and asked for 10,000 taels of silver. But before the emperor could respond, the eunuch's supervisor, Du Zhizhi, barked a reprimand. He snapped that the court was short on everything and asked where such a sum would even come from. He claimed that even if they had it, it wouldn't be spent on them. He told Tang Tong to tell his men to just endure the hardship. After his outburst, Du Zhizhi lifted his sharp, narrow face with an air of pride, clearly hoping for the emperor's approval. Tang Tong glared at him, teeth clenched. He retorted that the eunuch had never led troops and had no idea how difficult it truly was. Deep down, he was fuming. He couldn't understand why the Ming emperor refused to trust his generals, always sending these supervisors along. These men knew nothing of war. Some had never even heard a cannon fire, yet they sat in the command tents giving orders. It was a miracle they ever won. We watch as the emperor observes Du Zhizhi's clownish performance with a cold smile. Historically, this man would later open the gates to surrender. After opening the gates, Du Zhizhi spoke well. Zhongzhen smiled. Asking a question the eunuch promised to answer truthfully. The emperor asked what should be done if Tang Tong colluded with the rebels. Suddenly, Tang Tong felt a cold shiver run down his spine. While he was risking his life on the front lines, the emperor was already suspecting him of treason. A wave of bitter resentment began to swell. He knew this suspicion was inevitable, yet it still stung. Perhaps he should have followed the example of Lu Ziqing, the general from Shandong. Lu had faked an injury to avoid orders, and instead of punishment, the emperor had sent him money for medical expenses. Where was the logic? Du Zhizhi glanced at Tang Tong and declared he would use the emperor's sword to take the general's head. Tang Tong immediately dropped to his knees. He pleaded his innocence, but the emperor told him to rise. It was only a hypothetical, after all, or so he claimed. Tang Tong stood up, his legs trembling. His hatred for the eunuch and his resentment toward the emperor had finally reached a breaking point. If the emperor couldn't trust his own men, Tang thought, then perhaps the Ming dynasty wasn't worth saving. But Zhongjin continued his questioning. He asked Du Zhizhi what should happen if he were the one colluding with the rebels. The eunuch stammered, swearing his absolute loyalty. The emperor remained expressionless, repeating the if. Terrified, Du Zhizhi vowed that if he ever betrayed the throne, Tang Tong should take his head. To everyone's shock, the emperor began to clap. Since the eunuch had agreed to the terms, he told Tang Tong to get on with it. Du Zhizhi was frozen, assuming this was some dark joke. He forced a smile, claiming he was far too much of a coward for such jests. But the emperor wasn't laughing. Seeing that cold, serious face, Du Zhizhi realized his position of trust wouldn't save him this time. He threw himself onto the floor, forehead hitting the ground repeatedly as he wailed about his loyalty to the great Ming. With a cold sneer, the emperor took a secret letter from Wang Qinjian. It was the message intercepted from Feng Yuanyang. He tossed it to the floor like trash. These were the letters exchanged with the rebels, the ironclad proof of Du Zhizhi's betrayal. Du Zhizhi cried out in despair, his face turning pale as he prostrated himself. He wailed that someone must have framed him. He insisted he was a loyal servant of the inner court. When the emperor remained silent, Du Zhizhi turned his eyes toward Wang Qinjian. Lord Wang, I was raised by your own hand. I would never betray the emperor. Du Zhizhi pleaded, but Wang Qinjian only frowned. We see the truth here. The emperor had no real evidence, as that letter was from Feng Yuanyang. This was purely a move to appease Tang Tong. Realizing the game, Wang Qinjian snorted. He accused Du Zhizhi of blatant betrayal and ordered the guards to seize the eunuch immediately. He was to be taken out for sentencing. Two Jinui guards pushed through the doors, grabbing Du Zhizhi from both sides. As they began to haul him out, Du Zhizhi spiraled into a panic, his eyes darting around until they landed on Tang Tong. He abandoned all pride, screaming for the general to help him and swearing he had never once spoken to the rebels. Tang Tong simply ignored him. But just as the eunuch reached the threshold, the emperor signaled for the guards to stop. Our emperor turned to Tang Tong with a pleasant smile, asking what the legal punishment for colluding with the enemy was. Tang Tong felt a jolt of realization. In a low, steady voice, he confirmed that according to military law, the penalty was death. Since the guilt was established, the emperor ordered the execution. Tang Tong looked up, utterly baffled by the man before him. He couldn't understand the emperor's game. He appointed the man yesterday and killed him today. Was Du Zhizhi really a traitor? It seemed impossible to him. Anyone else might have a reason to join the rebels, but certainly not the palace. Eunuchs, to be honest, they were the last people who would want the dynasty to fall. Tang Tong didn't have time to overthink it. He bowed deeply, accepted the order, and grabbed Du Zhizhi by the collar. In that moment, he could no longer hide his inner joy. With a grimace of satisfaction, he dragged the eunuch away. The eunuch's cries of innocence were cut short moments later. Tang Tong then returned to the hall, feeling quite satisfied. His previous resentment had vanished along with Du Zhizhi. His only worry now was who the next supervisor would be. He reported the execution was done and asked who would be sent next. The emperor simply smiled and said no one. Tang Tong was stunned. The emperor explained that since the general was a pillar of the state, he was trusted implicitly. He then ordered Wang Qinjian to pay Tang Tong 20,000 taels of silver, promising to find the rest very soon. Looking up at Emperor Chongjin, Tang Tong's eyes instantly welled with tears as his previous grievances and mistrust completely vanished into thin air. He prostrated himself on the ground, kowtowing with a sudden, renewed sense of devotion. We see the emperor shake his head, disagreeing with the current plan. Li Zicheng had split his forces to attack the capital, and his general, Lu Fangliang, had already occupied Baoding. If Li Zicheng were stalled, Lu Fangliang would surely provide support, leaving Jiangwen caught in a deadly pincer movement. Tang Tong, the Count of Dingxi, insisted stubbornly that he did not fear death, but the emperor knew the court needed men and refused to let him fall into such a reckless trap. He ordered Tang Tong to hold Jiangwen for only a few days, then retreat to the capital with all his men. Before the enemy could complete their encirclement, Tang Tong vowed not to fail, while Wu Mingming and Wang Zhixin watched him leave, feeling a lingering sense of unease. Tang Tong had been furious about the supervisor Du Zhizhi just yesterday, yet today, the emperor had killed a single eunuch and completely secured the general's loyalty. It was a masterclass in manipulation, even if the long-term results remained to be seen. After Tang Tong departed, the emperor sat upon his throne to contemplate his next move. The logic was simple, meet force with force, but the problem was that he currently had neither soldiers nor generals to command. Thanks to the legacy of past gods of war, the late Ming emperors held little actual power. Of the 26 imperial camps, 21 were under the thumb of the Ministry of War. He could only truly rely on the Jinui and the 4 Tingxian camps, which had become the Brave Guard, the elite of the Imperial Guard. Unfortunately, the Brave Guard and their commander, Huang Digong, had been sent by him to hunt down the rebel Zhang Xianzhou. They were currently fighting in Anhui, far too distant to help defend the capital now. Even with power, There was simply no one left in the city to command. Since that was the case, he could only bet everything. Wu Mingming, Wang Jixin, he said. He asked how many men remained in the Jinui and the East Depot. Wu Mingming reported over 3,000 Jinui, while the East Depot had roughly 2,000. The emperor began to calculate between the three great camps, the guards, and the local militia, all added up to about 38,000 usable people. Once the essential palace guards were subtracted, he was left with only 36,000. Li Ziqing's army claimed to be 500,000 strong, though the real number was closer to 200,000. After splitting their routes and leaving garrisons, the force attacking Beijing would be about 120,000. They were fewer than rumored, but half were battle-hardened veterans from Shaanxi. A 1-to-4 ratio of the old and weak against the enemy? Not a chance. Of course, that was just his optimistic calculation for defending Beijing. The real key, as always, was money. If you don't have enough men, you recruit, but recruiting requires silver. The relationship between an emperor and his soldiers is much like a boss and his employees. Having money doesn't mean they'll die for you, but having no money certainly means they won't. Why should hungry, poorly clothed soldiers risk their lives to protect an emperor sitting comfortably in his golden hall? Where the money went was irrelevant to them. If they weren't paid, they simply blamed the man at the top. Our emperor understood this logic perfectly. To be honest, the late Ming's combat power wasn't actually low. There was a common saying back then: Ming soldiers are never full, but if they were, they would be invincible. And where were they actually being fed? Liao Dong, under the rival Huang Taiji. Closing his eyes, he asked how many months of pay were currently owed. Wu Mingming and Wang Jixin exchanged a glance, both stuttering and unable to find the words. They were too ashamed to speak, fearing they would further disgrace the Ming dynasty's reputation. The emperor's expression darkened as he demanded the truth. Finally, they admitted the Jinui had not been paid in 5 months. The East Depot was also 5 months behind. He let out a long sigh, wanting to curse someone, though he wasn't quite sure who. Ironically, these two groups were the ones owed the least. He told them to calculate the total amount needed immediately. A moment later, they reported the sum, 75,000 taels of silver for both groups. He then asked how much the three great camps were owed. Wu Mingming frowned. As the head of the Jinui, he certainly had that information. The three great camps were under the command of Li Guozhen, the Count of Xianqing. Naturally, he didn't want to offend a powerful peer, and Wang Jixin remained silent for the same reason. The emperor pushed him, telling Wu Mingming to speak freely given the dire circumstances. There was no point in hiding the truth anymore. The three great camps were roughly 8 months behind on pay. The emperor began to do the math in his head. He tallied the three great camps, the capital's defense forces, and the Jinui. He then ordered Wang Qinjin to bring the account books from the Ministry of Revenue and the Inner Court. The eunuch didn't dare delay, personally handing the ledgers to him. Opening the dusty, aged records, he flipped through the pages, his speed increasing as he neared the end. Upon reaching the final page, a sudden spark of fury ignited within him. He slammed the ledger onto the floor, sitting on his throne with teeth clenched in anger. The treasury of the great Ming dynasty contained a mere 3,000 taels of gold and 10,000 of silver. Even converted, it only totaled about 40,000 taels. In the city of Beijing, you could raid the home of any official above the 3rd rank and find more than that. He realized then just how dire the situation truly was. Since the dawn of the dynasty, the treasury had been perpetually empty. A court without funds is a state at a standstill, forcing Emperor Tianqi to rely on his private reserves. Tianqi had the infamous Wei Zhongxian, a man who certainly knew how to find money, but our current emperor had executed him immediately upon taking the throne. Whether it was Wei Zhongxian or the rival Donglin party, corruption was a given. However, the silver Wei embezzled would eventually return to the emperor's own pockets. But the silver stolen by those members of the Donglin party was a different story entirely. That silver vanished into the hands of scholars and officials, never to be seen by the throne again. As he stared at those cold, lifeless numbers, his heart felt heavy. His simmering fury began to sharpen into a metaphorical blade, ready to strike. He gripped that invisible hilt with white knuckles. Greed in times of peace was one thing, but with the dynasty on the brink, this was unforgivable. Yet, they still dared to steal. Beside him, Wu Mingming and Wang Jixin lowered their heads, feeling their very blood run cold under his gaze. They understood perfectly that while he was shouting at the ledgers, he was actually warning them. Seeing their fear, he felt a small sense of relief. The Jinui and the East Depot were his blades, and a blade must be sharpened to remain effective. Suddenly, he changed the subject to Wu Mingming's son. He instructed Wang Qinjin to prepare a wedding gift for the commander's son. Wu Mingming was stunned. Amidst the chaos, the emperor actually remembered his family. It seemed impossible that a ruler burdened by the weight of the world would care about a subordinate's personal life. Wu Mingming stammered that he couldn't possibly accept, but the emperor insisted, calling him his right hand. At that, even the cold-blooded Wu Mingming knelt, his eyes welling with genuine emotion. Then, the emperor turned his gaze toward Wang Jixin. He noted that the eunuchs of the East Depot were in desperate need of better discipline. Wang Jixin kowtowed immediately, his voice trembling with a fear that went beyond mere respect. The emperor asked if Du Sun wasn't one of his own men. Tang Bao had claimed Du died a martyr, but the emperor knew the truth. Du and Wang Qingying had defected to the enemy. Wang Jixin's face turned pale. This revelation meant two things. Du Sun was a traitor, and the emperor had a secret source of information that bypassed his own spies. After Xuanfu fell yesterday, the Jinhui and East Depot had both reported that the eunuch Du Sun had taken his own life to preserve his honor. They hadn't even finished their investigation, yet the emperor already knew the ugly truth. It was a terrifying thought for any official in that room. Did the emperor have a third, secret spy network? Wang Jixin trembled on the floor, begging for mercy for his failure to manage his subordinates. He stared intensely at Wang Jixin. While Wang's wealth didn't quite match the high nobility, it was still, to be honest, a staggering fortune compared to most. Silence filled the room as he weighed whether to replace Wang Jixin and Wu Mingming. The East Depot and Jinhui were his blades, after all. However, replacing leadership would throw both organizations into chaos for a time. In normal circumstances, that would be fine, but these were not normal times. With time running out, neither the Ming Dynasty nor the emperor could afford the consequences of such turmoil. Seeing the silence, Wang Jixin finally broke. The eunuch panicked, begging for mercy for his failures. He gave a slight nod. Since Wang knew his guilt, he would have a chance to redeem himself. He reminded them that they were his ministers. Errors should be corrected and merit rewarded. With the rebels approaching, they had to work as one. "We obey your command," Wu Mingming and Wang Jixin replied in unison. Only Li Ruoyan seemed a bit dejected as he kowtowed, feeling somewhat overlooked. We see him observing the three of them, his plan finally taking shape. Wu Mingming was fair enough, but he lacked initiative, always following the East Depot's lead. Wang Jixin, on the other hand, was capable and bold, but his weakness was glaringly obvious. He loved money more than life itself. Then there was Li Ruoyan, loyal, incorruptible, and a man who could truly be trusted. And so, a decision was made. Wu Mingming and Wang Jixin would remain the emperor's public blades, while Li Ruoyan would be hidden in the shadows to handle the dirty work. He ordered Wu Mingming to record every single word spoken during the upcoming assembly. Any omission, he warned, would be treated as a serious crime. Wu silently pulled out his brush and paper. Not long after, Wang Qingying entered to report that the 20,000 silver pieces had been delivered to Tang Tong. He acknowledged the news. Outside, the censor-in-chief, Li Banghua, was waiting for an audience, and the emperor signaled for him to be brought in. The white-haired Li Banghua stepped into the hall. He was a thin man with a slight hunch, his frame appearing fragile inside his weathered official robes. Against the backdrop of that old uniform, he looked every bit the weary, long-serving scholar. He moved with the quiet dignity of a man who had spent his life in the halls of power. Li Banghua has arrived to face the throne, the old man announced, performing the required etiquette. The emperor gave a cold smile and immediately accused Li Banghua of forming factions, corruption, and deceiving the crown. When asked if he knew his crime, Li Banghua simply cupped his hands, calmly asking if the emperor had any evidence to back such charges. As the current censor-in-chief, your annual salary is barely 100 taels, he noted. So, tell me, where did this fortune of 10,000 taels come from? Since the evidence is undeniable, I ask your majesty to punish me, Li Banghua replied without a hint of fear. He didn't deny the corruption, but he felt, to be honest, that the blame didn't lie solely with him. In the Ming Dynasty, an official salary was, quite frankly, notoriously low. To support a family, even the most honest official had to rely on corruption just to survive. Over time, greed would naturally grow, and eventually, the entire court became a den of thieves. He let out a cold sneer. You are the censor-in-chief. According to the Great Ming Code, what is the penalty for your crimes? At the mention of the Great Ming Code, Li Banghua visibly trembled. According to the law, anyone who embezzled more than 60 taels was to be executed in their skin, stuffed with straw and hung on a pole. I deserve death, Li Banghua said, his heart heavy as he prepared himself for the end. His only hope was that Wu Mingming and Wang Jixin would be gentle when they came for him. His old bones couldn't handle much. The emperor let out a long sigh. You are not guilty, he said, leaving Li Banghua stunned. I know that without this money, your family would starve. Ultimately, the fault is mine. I have failed to ensure my ministers are fed and clothed. Li Banghua was terrified, insisting that the sin was his alone and had nothing to do with the emperor. He spoke with a trembling voice, unable to fathom what was happening. One moment he was facing death, and the next, he was declared innocent. Such unpredictability surely masked a plot. Let the past be forgotten, the emperor continued. I only hope that from now on, you will discipline yourself and others for the Ming. Li Banghua swallowed hard, finally coming to his senses. He kowtowed quickly, thanking the emperor for sparing his life and vowing to serve him with absolute loyalty. We see that the emperor intended to use Li Banghua, but first, he needed to humble him. It was a calculated move, a gentle reminder of who held the power. Li Banghua wasn't actually afraid of death. In history, upon hearing of the emperor's passing, he would leave behind a final, poetic testament of his loyalty, and then take his own life for the nation. But here, the emperor simply ordered Wang Qingying to show him Feng Yuanyang's letter. Wang Qingying quickly handed the secret letter to Li Banghua. After reading it, the old man's brow furrowed, and he fell into a deep, contemplative silence. Sincerely, what do you think? I believe this is a loyal strategy, Li replied. Your Majesty should defend the capital, but send the crown prince to Nanjing. If the capital falls and your Majesty perishes, the Ming will still have half its territory. At those words, every official in the hall cursed him in their hearts. We see Wu Mingming swallow hard. No one else dared to speak such treasonous words to the emperor's face. Li Banghua's mouth was, to be honest, as stubborn as it was blunt. Wang Qingjin immediately stepped forward, pointing at Li Banghua and shouting in a rage. He accused Li Banghua of audacity that deserved death, yet Li continued without fear, insisting the capital was the dynasty's foundation. It could not be abandoned, especially with Wu Songgui's army already on the way. If the emperor fled now, the last of the Ming's elite forces would be surrendered. He argued that rebel tyranny couldn't last, unlike the northern invaders. Those northern slaves were the true threat. While the capital stood, they wouldn't dare push south. But if it fell, it would become their base for a total invasion. The emperor's brow twitched. He was, quite unexpectedly, impressed by this analysis. Li Banghua had mapped out the power struggle and the future perfectly, matching history itself. This censor-in-chief was a rare talent. Tell me then, why won't the rebels last? The emperor asked. Seeing the emperor's interest, Li Banghua finally felt his heart settle. He wiped the cold sweat from his brow and explained that taxes were the lifeblood of any government. Usually, revenue came from land and trade, but the rebels had promised to abolish land taxes, a bold move, if a bit foolish. That left only commercial taxes, which relied entirely on merchants. But the rebels had spent their journey robbing and killing them. Without merchants to tax, the rebels could only survive by looting. Eventually, when there was nothing left to steal, they would crumble. The emperor found himself agreeing. Even future historians would point out that in an agricultural age, such a policy was doomed. Since nearly 80% of the Ming's revenue came from the land, giving that up was essentially digging one's own grave. Satisfied with the performance, the emperor stood and dismissed Wu Mingming, Wang Jixin, and Li Ruoli from the hall. Once they were gone, he turned to Li Banghua and praised his extraordinary insight. Sincerely, your talent is truly remarkable. I intend to make you the Grand Secretary, the emperor said. Li Banghua, however, felt a sudden, sinking feeling in his gut. In 17 years, this emperor had gone through 19 Grand Secretaries. Most ended up fired or, worse, beheaded. It was a position of great power, yes, but it mostly involved being the emperor's personal scapegoat. No one wanted this hot potato. Li Banghua knew the Grand Secretary position was a hot potato, but he felt that in times like these, one must face challenges head-on. He saw this as a rare opportunity. He noted that while the cabinet had many rules, one usually joined it before being promoted to the top. To be appointed directly seemed improper, but the emperor simply smiled, stating that his word was the law. To be honest, he wasn't wrong. Li Banghua knelt to thank him for such grace, but the emperor cut him off. Don't thank me yet. Tell me, are you afraid of death? Li Banghua froze, thinking it over carefully before answering. If the emperor ordered his death, he wouldn't be afraid. As for why, he didn't seek much in this life. Perhaps a bit of comfort, wealth, or a name in the history books. By becoming Grand Secretary today, his desire for status was fulfilled, and anyone the emperor chose to execute would certainly be remembered. And who could blame him for wanting that? Only the mediocre are forgotten by history, he claimed. These words seemed to strike a chord deep within the emperor's heart. We see the emperor stand there in silence for a moment, letting the weight of that bold statement hang in the air. Turning around, the emperor's voice became solemn. He needed a powerful official to dominate the court, and he would grant that man absolute authority. He would be below only one, but above 10,000. He could kill any official, eunuch, or noble, and the emperor wouldn't interfere. As long as he brought in money and his greed wasn't excessive, the emperor would guarantee his safety for as long as he himself lived. But if the emperor died, that man's fate might be worse than the infamous Yin songs. He might be honored in history or rot for eternity. Can you bear such a burden? The emperor asked. Wang Qingjin watched in disbelief, feeling as though the emperor was now a complete stranger. The emperor was actually delegating power, something he had loathed since his coronation. We have to wonder if this would only invite more risk. Li Banghua looked up, his aged face a map of deep wrinkles, yet his eyes remained remarkably bright and full of spirit. He stood up solemnly before kneeling once more to kowtow. He told the emperor not to worry. He had no desire to be another Yin song. He wished to be like the great reformer, Zhang Juzhing. Very well, the emperor replied, dismissing him to prepare for the morning court. Only after Li Banghua had left the hall did the emperor finally look away. There were two reasons for this gamble, the first being his own history. Since taking the throne, he had executed 18 high-ranking officials and over 100 lower ones. Even the cabinet had been decimated. We see that in his 17-year reign, he had already cycled through 19 grand secretaries. It was a revolving door of power. Among them were pillars of the state, but also treacherous villains and corrupt opportunists. Most were replaced before they could even find their footing. This constant turnover meant imperial orders rarely left the capital. Factional struggles had shifted from the court down to the local provinces. The country was spiraling into chaos. The lucky officials were merely dismissed, while the unlucky ones were executed. Everyone lived in constant fear. By this point, the Donglin faction had lost its real power, and court infighting had reached a deceptive plateau. But conflict never truly vanishes. It simply shifts. Part of it went to the provinces, while the rest became a direct confrontation between the emperor and his ministers. They opposed everything he proposed just to prove their own worth. His plan was to use Li Banghua to restart the court's internal friction. He intended to use Li to secure funds and eliminate enemies. In the short term, he'd seize assets. In the long term, he'd fix taxes. He needed to purge the infighting officials, the corrupt ministers, and the wealthy, treacherous merchants. He took a moment to compose his emotions and ordered Wang Qingjin to summon the officials. Soon, the piercing ring of the Jinyang bell echoed through the air. The sound traveled for miles, resonating through the entire city and reaching the cold, desolate city walls. There, the soldiers were starving and lacked even the most basic supplies. They couldn't even afford charcoal to keep warm. To be honest, the spring of the 17th year of Chongzhen was exceptionally bitter. Inside the hall, the civil and military officials had already gathered. He took a deep breath and walked into cries of "Long live the emperor." As the officials kowtowed, he scanned the room from the high steps. Half of the ministers were bad seeds, and the vice ministers were no better. After surveying the crowd, his gaze landed on the Grand Secretary, Wei Zhaod. He looked at him closely, knowing the man wouldn't be around much longer. He dismissed the formalities, and the officials rose. Wei Zhaod stood there in his bright red robes and black official hat, looking quite distinguished. Stepping forward with a bow, Wei Zhaod reported that rebels had broken through Xuanfu and were now marching directly toward the capital. In the Ming Dynasty, the status of a minister was vastly different from the later Qing era. They were treated as men, not slaves. There was no requirement to kneel at every turn. He nodded and asked if anyone had a strategy to stop the enemy. Wei Zhaod's mind began to churn. Wei Zhaod's mind was racing, though to be honest, he had more charisma than actual talent. He simply offered a rehearsed answer. He claimed that if the capital's people and army united, they could surely resist the rebels, empty words that prompted further questioning. When asked how to unite them, Wei Zhaod bowed and suggested using massive financial rewards. His words stunned more than just the emperor. Even his subordinate, Shen Weibing, looked at him with disdain. If the court had money, the rebels wouldn't have made it this far from Shangxi. It was, quite frankly, complete nonsense. He turned his gaze toward Li Banghua, knowing that the plan in the letter had to come from him. Li had to be the one to speak so that the responsibility would rest on his shoulders. A wise ruler doesn't propose, he merely chooses. It's the classic multiple-choice strategy of leadership. If things go wrong, the blame falls squarely on the minister's shoulders. The emperor is merely misled, for a king never admits fault. This is the art of the emperor, something the historical Chongzhen never mastered. We can't really blame him, as no one expected him to inherit the throne. Seeing the signal, Li Banghua gave Wei Zhaod a cold look. He stepped forward and suggested that to save the Ming legacy, the crown prince should be sent to Nanjing immediately. The other princes and the inner court would follow, while the rest would remain with the emperor to defend the capital. They would hold the city and wait for reinforcements. Now, our protagonist had already made his choice, but he had to follow the protocol. He needed these scholar officials to feel involved, as if they were truly governing the world alongside the Son of Heaven. This, too, was part of the imperial art. Li Banghua's proposal hit the silent hall like a sudden explosion. "Your Majesty, you must not," Li Mingrue cried out, kneeling instantly. He argued that the crown prince was far too young to act as regent. In his eyes, the boy lacked the emperor's clarity. Having recorded the prince's daily life, he knew the youth wasn't ready for the task. To be fair, even the emperor himself might struggle to control the entrenched officials in Nanjing, let alone a child. "Li Mingrue, how dare you?" someone shouted, claiming that moving south was a shameful repeat of history that would lead to a divided nation. They argued that the Ming could not be split in two and that staying to defend the capital was the only safe path. But Li Banghua, the censor-in-chief, wasn't about to back down. He gathered his strength to fight for his position. "Your Majesty, if the crown prince leaves, the people's hearts will shatter and our defense will fail. These men are clearly betraying the Ming. You must punish them." Wang Xiong, a supervising secretary, stepped forward. Despite his low rank, his influence was surprisingly vast. He had the power to monitor ministries and even challenge the emperor's own decrees. Without this special status, of course, a mere 7th-rank official wouldn't even be allowed in the hall. Soon, Chen Fui and Shen Weibing joined the fray. When Zhang Jingyan, the Minister of War, finally stood up to take a side, the debate in the hall reached a fever pitch. We can see the court is now divided into 3 distinct camps. Led by Li Banghua, nearly 20% of the officials signed a petition. They wanted the emperor to defend the capital while the prince secured the south, just in case the worst happened. Then there was Li Mingrue's group, who felt the prince was too young. They argued it was the emperor himself who should move south. However, Guang Shiheng's faction held the majority. Backed by the Minister of War, they insisted that Beijing could be held and that no one should leave. To them, a departure meant certain panic. To be fair, all 3 sides had logic on their side. As the 3 groups bickered, others watched in silence. Perhaps they were indifferent, or perhaps they were just waiting for a winner to emerge. What began as a debate over policy quickly devolved into petty personal attacks. It was not, to be honest, a particularly dignified sight. Your Majesty, Li Banghua's talk of moving south is pure heresy. He should be executed. Guang Xiang barked. Guang Xiang is a short-sighted fool. Li Banghua snapped back. It is his head that should be on the chopping block. Li Mingrui pleaded again, warning that they would soon be trapped by the rebels. Finally, our protagonist decided he had heard enough. He signaled Wang Qingjin to restore order, then turned his gaze to Wei Zhaode, asking for the cabinet's official stance. Wei Zhaode looked around cautiously before claiming the cabinet hadn't reached a decision. Our protagonist could only offer a cold, knowing smile. In reality, Wei Zhaode was already planning his betrayal. He was convinced that a man of his talents would be welcomed by the rebels. He imagined being treated like royalty by Li Zicheng, which is why he wanted the emperor and the princes to stay put. If the capital held, he'd claim the glory. If it fell, the emperor and his sons would become his ultimate bargaining chips. His surrender to the Dasun rebels was, in his mind, a chance for a new, great contribution. To him, being a court official meant he didn't need to care who sat on the throne. Wei Zhaode turned to his colleagues to whisper for their opinions. We should note the cabinet was shrinking. Chun Yin and Jiang Deheng had resigned, while Li Jiantai had been captured by rebels in Baoding. This left only 4 men, including Wei Zhaode. The others were Fang Yuegong, Fan Jingwen, and Qiu Yu, a small group for such an empire. Fan Jingwen held the most influence as the Minister of Works. Seeing the tension, Fang Yuegong and Qiu Yu, knowing they couldn't afford to offend anyone, said they would follow their superiors. Fan Jingwen, however, spoke up in favor of the southern move. He argued that the army was short on supplies and the road to Nanjing was long. Any incident regarding their pay during the journey could trigger a mutiny with unthinkable consequences. Wei Zhaode shook his head, telling Fan his reasoning was flawed, as the capital's garrison was already quite small. Sending 1,000 men to escort the prince would only make the defense even more difficult. Besides, a young prince in Nanjing might become a puppet for scheming officials, which would bring a hopeless catastrophe to the Ming. After all, the capital was the foundation. Abandoning it meant handing half the world to the rebels on a silver platter, a cowardly plan. He insisted they hold the city and wait for the Qin King's army, claiming the rebels would scatter once Wu Sangui and his elite Ning Yuan army finally arrived. The Grand Secretary spoke with a calm, chilling precision, dismantling the opposition in 3 sentences. He countered both Li Banghua and Li Mingrui while backing Guang Xiang with logic that seemed, to be honest, impossible to refute. Our protagonist frowned. These points were airtight, and he finally realized how formidable a Grand Secretary could be. At that moment, he felt a cold, murderous intent rising within him. As a transmigrator, he knew exactly what Wei Zhaode was really thinking. He signaled for everyone to return to their places. We see his gaze turn icy as he tells the court he has heard their arguments, some logical and some utter nonsense. Guang Xiang, you claim the capital can be held. How? The official suggested that since the capital had 1 million residents, they could easily mobilize 100,000. Our protagonist asked grimly how they would be recruited, by force or enlistment. If by force, they might defect. And if by enlistment, where would the food and pay come from? Are the people supposed to bring their own rations to guard the city? Under this barrage of questions, Guang Shiheng's mind went completely blank. He could only stammer, his previous confidence vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. We see that our protagonist was merely using this to draw out Wei Zhaode. Guang Xiang was the appetizer. The man behind him was the main course. Terrified, Guang Xiang collapsed to his knees, begging for mercy and claiming he only meant well. Our protagonist simply offered a cold, thin smile. He reminded the man that he had already been named Minister of Revenue and asked for his strategy. That please sent a shiver of true terror through the official. In the Ming court, very few people could survive the emperor's politeness. Guang Xiang began knocking his head against the floor, pleading for forgiveness. He admitted his words were nothing but nonsense. As he watched the man grovel, the protagonist felt the last of his pity evaporate. Perhaps if Guang Xiang had shown some backbone, he might have been spared. After all, in these final days of the Ming dynasty, a man of character is a rare find. But this man's spine was as soft as a reed. With a wave of his hand, the emperor dismissed him. It wasn't quite time for an execution. That could wait. He looked over the assembly and remarked that he was not a foolish ruler. Since ascending the throne in the 7th year of Tianqi, he had faced endless disasters. He had intended to save the empire, but fate had other plans. With rebels rampant and the people's hearts wavering, the capital was becoming impossible to hold. He was disappointed, both in himself and in them. We deserve death, the officials cried, lamenting their inability to ease the emperor's burdens. Wei Zhaode was the first to kneel in apology. It was a hollow gesture, but a necessary one for the sake of appearances. Soon, the entire court was kneeling before him. He told them to rise and announced he would follow Li Banghua's plan. The princes and the inner court would head south with a small escort. The rest would remain to defend the capital and wait for the Qin King's reinforcements. Li Banghua was tasked with drafting the list of those leaving. He had already weighed his options. Whether in history or this new reality, there were only 3 paths forward, and fleeing was the first to be discarded. If he abandoned the city, the consequences would be unthinkable. The sacred promise of the emperor guarding the gates would become a hollow lie. Decades of sacrifice by soldiers in Liaodong would be rendered meaningless. More importantly, Wu Sangui and his army would be caught in a pincer. If Wu Sangui followed his historical path and surrendered to the invaders, the tragedy would repeat itself. He would not only fail his ancestors, he would fail his ancestors, the spirits of those who died in battle and the suffering people. Next, he ruled out any possibility of peace talks. The Ming Dynasty had a code: no marriage alliances, no reparations, and no ceding land. An emperor guards the gates and dies for the state. The only answer was to stay and fight. Historically, Emperor Chongzhen couldn't save the Ming in 17 years. He certainly couldn't do it in 1 week. The only thing to do was hold Beijing. As long as Li Zicheng didn't enter the city, the foundation of the Ming remained, and history could be rewritten. "Your Majesty is wise," the officials cried. We see Li Banghua lead over 30 officials as they knelt in submission to the decree. Seeing this, the supporters of Li Mingrui hesitated for a moment before they, too, dropped to their knees. The emperor then handed a task to Li Banghua. By letting him draft the list of those heading south, the emperor was quietly signaling that Li Banghua now held immense power. To escape to the south, one now had to get on Li Banghua's good side. In an instant, half the court was kneeling to accept the order. Wei Zhao's expression grew heavy. His ideal plan was to keep the emperor and princes here as a gift for the rebel leader, Li Zicheng. Forcing an abdication would have been a massive achievement in the eyes of the rebels. But if the crown prince escaped while the emperor stayed to fight, things would become far more complicated. Instead of a reward, Wei Zhao would likely be singled out for punishment by the invaders. He had heard rumors of how the Dasan rebels treated Ming officials who brought no entry gift. To be honest, he was starting to panic. In the game of politics, the minority must follow the majority. Since the emperor and most officials agreed on the move, it was now irreversible. Still, he couldn't understand it. Normally, the emperor would hesitate, retreat to the back hall to deliberate, or overthink things for days. What had changed? Why was he making such massive decisions right here in the open court? Wei Zhao tried one last time to sway him, but the emperor's mind was made up. He told the officials going south to serve the prince well, while those staying would help him defend the capital. Over 40 officials responded in unison, and then, with a faint, almost imperceptible smile, the emperor moved on to the second item of business. We see him reveal that he had calculated the costs for the garrison and the new recruits. There was a deficit of 1.5 million taels of silver. The national treasury was empty, and as the saying goes, even the wisest ruler cannot fight a war without resources. He asked his ministers to find a way. If they could just scrape together 1 million taels, the capital could be saved. The officials, however, remained silent. As if by instinct, the officials lower their heads in unison. The exhausting debate over silver had been dragging on for decades, a constant shadow over the throne. Expenses had long since outpaced income. To be honest, without the reserves left by the previous emperor, the military would have run out of pay years ago. Where were they supposed to find more? If the Ming could simply conjure silver, they wouldn't be at the mercy of a peasant uprising. Seeing their silence, we see the emperor smile. It is a thin, artificial smile. "Since you have no solutions," he says, "I have a small idea of my own." The Grand Secretary, Wei Zhao, asks for clarification. Though clearly reluctant, Wei Zhao plays along with the emperor's lead. The suggestion is simple: donations. The assembled officials, however, remained deathly silent. It was an old routine, after all. Since the 16th year of his reign, they had been asked to donate countless times in exchange for empty titles. While the emperor appears anxious on the surface, he is secretly giving them one last chance to prove their worth. And then, Li Banghua is the first to step forward. He declares that since he first entered government service decades ago, every single penny he owns has been provided by the imperial court. Now that the state is in peril, he offers his entire family fortune to help fund the defense. It was a gesture of absolute, perhaps even suicidal, loyalty. The emperor stands to praise him, but in the shadows, Wei Zhao and his followers can barely contain their mocking sneers at such a display. They laugh at Li Banghua, viewing him as a man with no sense. He was already a high-ranking official of the second rank. What more could he possibly gain? A year ago, perhaps, buying favor might have been a sound investment. But back then, the Ming Dynasty still had a pulse, however faint. Now, the empire is like a collapsing tower in a storm. They believe that even 1 million taels of silver cannot stop the inevitable march of history. To them, it makes more sense to save their gold for the next regime. Besides, the emperor's promise of great rewards sounds suspiciously like empty talk. But then, Wang Zhixing, the head of the East Depot, kneels before the throne. He declares his gratitude and offers to donate half of his considerable wealth. He makes the offer with visible pain, clearly mourning the loss of his coins. The emperor's lip twitches at the sight of such blatant, lingering greed. Even after a stern warning, the man insisted on keeping half his hoard. Some people, it seems, truly would choose their riches over their lives. The emperor masks his irritation with a smile and promotes him on the spot. Nearby, poor Wang Qinjin feels a wave of genuine, quiet frustration. He wants to help his master, but he has already given everything he owns. He can't even scrape together 10 taels to show his support. Then there is Wu Mengming, who remembers the emperor's earlier words. To save his own skin, he forces himself to speak up and offer a sum of silver. 1,000 taels. Commander Wu Mengming shouts, his voice tight with urgency. He asks if anyone else will step up, and another official offers 500 to help. I'll give 1,000. 800 from me. Inspired by Li Bonghua's lead, over 40 officials finally begin to open their purses and donate. The emperor calculates the donations, which range from a few dozen to 1,000 taels, totaling barely 50,000. He asks if anyone else will step forward. He waits with an expressionless face, but the officials remain silent. Those who wanted to give have already done so. The rest use their silence to take a stand. His gaze turns stern as he surveys the room. Since no one is donating, he announces he will borrow money instead, a word that makes the Grand Secretary's heart skip. Wei Zhaod nearly laughs out loud at the absurdity. To him, a son of heaven borrowing from his own subjects is a complete loss of imperial dignity. He sees no difference between borrowing and donating in this climate. If they won't give, they certainly won't lend to a man he considers to have the brain of a pig. The others, however, have a different concern. If the emperor asks to borrow money directly, they realize it will be nearly impossible to refuse him. The officials and nobles lower their heads in deep thought. Wang Qingjin, seeing no one respond, begins to worry that the emperor's reputation is at stake. He frantically winks at Wang Zhixing, who feels the weight of the eunuch's glare. With a heavy sigh, the old man realizes he must step up once more. Kneeling again, Wang Zhixing offers to lend 500 taels. The emperor watches him, thinking that this old fox is finally learning how to behave. After waiting a moment longer, the emperor decides to call on a specific official, Wang Jingji, a man who would later surrender to both the rebels and the invaders. He decides to make an example of him first. Wang Jingji gives a subtle, hidden pout before stepping forward with a perfectly respectful bow. The emperor asks him point-blank how much cash he has at home. Wang Jingji hesitates, sensing that the emperor is definitely hiding a malicious intent. He tells himself that if his house is raided, he'll simply be the first to welcome the rebels. It was a dangerous thought, but he felt he had the upper hand. After calculating his spare change, Wang Jingji claims he only has about 100 taels in cash, insisting the rest of his wealth isn't easily accessible. The emperor narrows his eyes. Since the man claims to have so little, he suggests borrowing only half. 50 taels sounds fair, doesn't it? Wang Jingji is utterly stunned, wondering if the emperor has gone mad. He wants to refuse, but he is still far too intimidated by the weight of imperial authority. He knows any money lent will never be seen again. After a long pause, he stammers that he has a large family to support and very little to spare. He claims 50 taels won't last them more than a few days. The emperor simply tells him not to worry. As long as he has food, the official will not starve. Since the emperor had put it so bluntly, Wang Jingji found he could no longer argue. He could only agree, his face a mask of pure misery. Our emperor continues, his face unreadable, as he calls for Fan Jingwen, the minister of works. He asks the man point-blank, how much silver is hidden in his home? Fan Jingwen replies with the utmost respect that he has less than 50 taels. Since the amount is so pitiful, the emperor decides not to bother, which makes the others perk up. They quickly realize the strategy. If they simply play the part of the impoverished, honest official, they might just escape this financial trap. Next, the emperor turns to Zhang Jingyan, the minister of war. Zhang kneels with a look of deep distress, claiming his household is utterly destitute. He insists that as a clean official, he has no savings left. Even Wang Jingji is impressed by the sheer audacity of claiming to have absolutely nothing. The emperor asks if this is truly the case, and Zhang swears he wouldn't dare lie. And so, we turn to the Grand Secretary, Wei Zhaod. The emperor's expression is growing darker by the second. Under the watchful eyes of the court, Wei Zhaod steps forward with a calm, measured pace. He offers to lend 500 taels, but the emperor stops him. He wasn't asking for a donation. He wanted to know exactly how much cash was in the house. Wei Zhaod scoffs internally, claiming his home is so poor he lives on borrowed funds. Even that 500 taels, he claims, was a loan from a friend. Standing nearby, Wang Qingjin is practically vibrating with rage. He knows these men have hoarded more wealth than the entire national treasury. To see them so stingy during a national crisis is truly infuriating. In this moment, he wishes he had the terrifying power of the old eunuch, Wei Zhongxian. He longs to intimidate the court into submission, but he can only watch. The emperor, meanwhile, shifts his gaze toward Zhu Chunqian, the Duke of Chun. We should note that Zhu Chunqian comes from a long line of nobility, his ancestors having served the imperial family since the very beginning of the dynasty. His family wealth likely dwarfs the imperial treasury dozens of times over, and yet, he offers the emperor no hope whatsoever. He claims that while his estate is large, he has already distributed his wealth to his servants so they can flee the approaching rebels. He insists he has less than 500 taels left, a mere pittance. As he speaks, a heavy, cold silence settles over the great hall. The message is unmistakable. He would rather give his fortune to his servants than give a single copper coin to his sovereign. The emperor looks out at his officials, his heart likely turning to ash. He asks one last time if they are telling the truth. Wei Zayod, ever the seasoned politician, kowtows and reminds the emperor that even the soldiers haven't been paid in months. The officials, he claims, are just as desperate. Our emperor decides it's time to try a different approach. He catches the eye of Wu Mingming, and after a silent nod, the gloom on his face finally vanishes. In its place is a cold, sharp sneer. He asks them plainly, if they are lying, wouldn't that be the crime of deceiving the sovereign? The officials can't help but smirk. To them, deceiving him is a small price to pay. They believe he wouldn't dare kill them when the dynasty is at its end, and if Li Ziqing arrives, they'll still be officials. Wei Zayod kowtows once more, insisting they have spent their lives toiling for the state and would never dream of lying. He begs for the emperor to recognize their loyalty. The emperor begins to clap, praising the grand secretary for his fine words. For a moment, the tension breaks, and the others think they've actually escaped. But that relief is short-lived when they notice the wicked, almost predatory smile on his face. Suddenly, he slams his hand down onto the imperial desk. He warns them that since they've all spoken the truth, he won't be merciful if a single lie is discovered. The officials are momentarily stunned by the outburst. However, they quickly return to their silent defiance, dismissing it as an empty threat. He then calls for Wu Mingming, whose expression is now cold as ice. As the commander of the Jinyue, Wu Mingming is a man of iron nerves, yet even he feels a shiver down his spine at the emperor's tone. The emperor asks if he has recorded every word spoken today. When Wu confirms he has, he is ordered to take a squad directly to Wang Zhengji's estate. If they find more than 100 taels of silver, he is to seize the property without further orders. Once the inventory is complete, the wealth is to be sent to the ministry. As for the family, they are to be hauled off to the authorities to await their fate. Naturally, the smug expressions in the room vanish in an instant, especially on one face. Wang Zhengji is hit by a wave of pure panic. As a high-ranking official of the third rank, the idea of having less than 100 taels is, frankly, impossible. He only said that to play the part of the victim, but with so many people doing the same, he wonders why he was the only one singled out. He looks to Wei Zayod for help, but finding none, he forces himself to stay calm. He bows deeply, asking the emperor to name the crime that justifies such a raid. He argues that he doesn't know what he's done wrong to deserve his home being ransacked. He knows very well that without a formal charge, the emperor faces a backlash. If the sovereign arrests a high official without cause, the rest of the court will surely turn on him. To take action, one needs a very good reason. This is the fundamental rule of the political game they all play. Even an emperor cannot simply ignore it without the entire court spiraling out of control. To do otherwise would be to invite the scorn of history as a tyrant, something this emperor has always been desperate to avoid. He simply smiles coldly. Without waiting for him to speak, Li Banghua, the censor-in-chief, steps forward. He announces that he is officially impeaching the minister, Wang Zhengji. There are two crimes. First, corruption. Wang Zhengji's ancestors were poor, yet after 17 years in office, his wealth exceeds 100,000 taels of silver. That money must be the fruit of corruption. Second, the crime of factionalism, forming cliques and suppressing dissent. I ask your majesty to punish him. I second that. Led by Li Banghua, the members of the censorate kneel in a wave, demanding justice against Wang Zhengji. Wang Zhengji's face turns a sickly shade of pale. He never expected Li Banghua to lead the charge. Everyone knows he is a loyal follower of Wei Zayod. The political intent here is impossible to miss. Before he can even defend himself, our emperor offers a thin smile and addresses the censor. He suggests that Li Banghua might be being a bit too severe. Wang Zhengji is utterly floored by this sudden defense. One moment, he was a criminal, and the next, he's being shielded. Li Banghua is just as confused. The emperor himself ordered the seizure of assets, so why call the charges severe now? Could the accusations be improper? With a faint, knowing smile, the emperor notes that Minister Wang claimed to have less than 100 taels of silver in his entire estate. He explains there are only two possibilities. Either that money doesn't belong to the minister, perhaps it was stolen or looted, but either way, it is certainly ill-gotten wealth. Or, the minister has intentionally lied to his sovereign. He asks Wang Zhengji to choose. Is it option 1 or option 2? A heavy silence fills the hall as all eyes fix on Wang Zhengji. The man is completely stunned by the emperor's logic. He never imagined the emperor could be this cunning. If he chooses the first, the law demands death. If he chooses the second, execution is a mercy. The situation has spiraled beyond his control. Realizing this, Wang Zhengji decides to play a different game. If the emperor wants money for the army, then he will make it a public sacrifice. He falls to his knees, claiming he is wronged, but offers to donate his entire fortune to the military funds. He begs the emperor to remember his half-lifetime of service to the great Ming and show a shred of mercy. He pleads for his family's safety. As he speaks, tears and snot run down his face, a truly pathetic display, even for a desperate man. The other officials look at Wang Zhengji with pure contempt before turning to the emperor. Their eyes are filled with a single, silent question. They know he needs money, but this method is a bridge too far. After all, no one wants to be next. Our emperor simply lets out a cold snort. He clasps his hands behind his back, looking down with utter disdain. He asks if a man like him truly thinks he is worthy of assisting the throne. With 2 million taels of silver in the inner hall, why would I ever need to seize assets to fill the treasury? This bold claim sends a shockwave through the court. Everyone, including our loyal Wang Qinjian, is utterly stunned. 2 million taels is an astronomical sum, the kind of wealth this emperor hasn't seen in 15 years. Wei Zhaod, sensing a trap, quickly asks why such a fortune wasn't used earlier if it was always there, rather than letting the court fall into such misery. Our emperor simply offers a knowing smile. He admits he didn't know about the silver either, at least, not until very recently. He explains that his grandfather appeared in a dream last night to reveal the secret. This grandfather was none other than the Wanli emperor, Zhuijuan. Wanli was the longest reigning and, arguably, the most money-obsessed ruler in the history of the Ming Dynasty. Yes, that is saying quite a lot. If it were any other ancestor, the officials would be skeptical, but the legend of Wanli hiding massive hoards of silver in the palace is a well-known tale. Wei Zhaod is the first to recover his wits. While they respect the supernatural, he notes that without proof, a dream is just a dream. He asks for the location. Our emperor gives him a brief, dismissive glance before turning his attention back to Wang Qinjian. He reveals there is a cellar behind the hall of mental cultivation where the silver is buried, ordering his men to dig as deep as necessary to find it. Wang Qinjian is so overcome with excitement that he completely forgets palace etiquette, practically sprinting out of the hall to carry out the order. With his departure, a heavy silence settles over the assembly. As everyone waits in anticipation, our emperor sits on his throne with perfect, unshakable calm. He knows the history books recorded this hidden hoard, even if the original emperor was somehow left in the dark. Why that was, however, remains one of history's great mysteries. Not far away, Wang Qinjian gathers every eunuch and guard he can find to begin the frantic excavation. It doesn't take long before Wang Qinjian returns, clutching a silver ingot and wearing a triumphant smile. He reports that the cellar was exactly where he said. While they haven't counted it all, he estimates there is at least 1 million taels, likely more. A collective gasp of disbelief ripples through the court. This is no longer just about the money. It has become a matter of divine intervention. And in this era, such things were taken very seriously indeed. Most would rather believe in a miracle than risk offending the heavens. Wang Qinjian falls to his knees, raising his hands in a gesture of pure devotion. He kowtows deeply, shouting for all to hear that heaven is protecting the great Ming. Inspired by his fervor, the rest of the officials quickly follow suit and drop to their knees. But before they can even stand, our emperor points directly at Wang Jingji, asking for his final defense. Wang Jingji is utterly broken. To him, this silver feels like a blade driven straight into his heart, draining every ounce of his will to resist. He collapses to the floor, begging for mercy and offering his entire family fortune just to save his kin. Our emperor simply asks what crime he is atoning for. The crime of embezzlement, he confesses. The emperor offers a cold sneer, remembering the chance he gave him. Suddenly, Wei Zhaod and others begin to intercede. They beg for leniency, claiming Wang Jingji was merely confused and shouldn't have let greed lead him to deceive the throne. A likely story, indeed. Seeing that the emperor is ready to make an example of Wang Jingji, Wei Zhaod, Zhang Jingyan, and Zhu Chunxin all drop to their knees in a desperate plea. They understand perfectly well that if one of them falls, the rest are soon to follow. Before long, half the officials in the hall are kneeling in solidarity. As the chorus of pleas grows louder, our emperor's internal fury only intensifies. These scholars speak of loyalty to the Ming, yet their hearts belong only to themselves. It brings to mind the words of Han Fizi, who named 5 vermin that destroy a state, and placed the scholars at the very top of that list. These men pride themselves on Confucian ideals like benevolence and righteousness, but as we look closer, the reality is far less noble. The truly terrifying part is the double standard. They shout high-minded slogans while doing the exact opposite, simply because they hold the power of interpretation. Take the case of Sun Chuanting. Years ago, when invaders crossed the border, he and Hong Chengqiu led 50,000 Qin soldiers to defend the capital. Though the journey was grueling, they fulfilled their duty to the throne. Such merit might not have earned a promotion, but it certainly shouldn't have invited ruin. And yet, his cautious strategy of waiting for the right moment to strike was met with nothing but suspicion. To make matters worse, a severe cold left him deaf. These 2 factors were enough for the emperor to lose all faith in him. Sun Chuanting was thrown into prison, where he would languish for 3 long years. Where was the righteousness of the court scholars then? We notice a distinct lack of voices pleading for Sun Chuanting's release during that time. Every official knew the truth, but they remained silent to protect their own skins. This betrayal shattered the trust between the emperor and his military commanders. The foundation of the state was crumbling. A nation needs farmers to till the soil and soldiers to bleed for it, yet no one in court cared for their welfare. Instead, they found every possible way to exploit them. Consequently, the farmers abandoned their fields and the soldiers lost their will to fight. As the national strength withered, the end of the Ming became inevitable. Half the blame lies with the cold laws of history, while the other half rests squarely on the shoulders of the emperor and these scholars. He knows, deep down, that their current display of loyalty is a sham. Our story continues as the emperor realizes that admitting fault is just a survival tactic. Wang Zhixing, he shouts, catching the man who was just enjoying the show completely off guard. He cautiously peeks out of the corner of his eye, and seeing the emperor's fury isn't aimed at him, he finally exhales. He is ordered to accompany Commander Wu and investigate every official the emperor just named. Anyone whose story doesn't match the facts will be dealt with. There is no need to request a decree, raid their homes, and arrest them immediately. They are to supervise each other and hand all seized assets to the Ministry of Revenue. If there is any favoritism or error, they will be executed on the spot. Wang Zhixing tremblingly kowtows and follows Wu Mengming, fleeing the hall as fast as possible. As they leave the Hall of Supreme Harmony, he has a premonition. The emperor who once purged Wei Zhongxian is back, and he seems even more ruthless than before. That previous purge only targeted Wei Zhongxian's eunuch faction, but this time, the emperor is coming for everyone. Wang Zhixing is glad he donated, yet he remains terrified. After all, he still has a massive fortune hidden away, which, naturally, is a very dangerous thing to have right now. As the two men disappear, the emperor feels a sense of relief. In critical moments, one must rely on the Jinui and the Eastern Depot. We see that imperial power in the Ming isn't absolute. It faces constraints in many areas. In the capital, besides the Yongwei camp, the only forces the emperor can move alone are the Jinui and the Eastern Depot. Moving other troops requires several key procedures. First, the emperor must consult the Grand Secretariat to draft a decree. Then, both the Secretariat and the Directorate of Ceremonial must apply their seals. Once signed, the palace eunuch of the imperial stables takes the decree to the Ministry of War. The ministry must then confirm that everything is in order and that there are absolutely no errors or discrepancies in the paperwork. After that, the troops can move. No matter how much power these officials hold, they cannot overrule the emperor, and what he cannot do, the eunuchs certainly cannot. Watching Wu Mengming and Wang Zhixing depart, Wang Zhongxi falls into despair. He can't understand why the emperor's personality has shifted so suddenly from being indecisive to cutting through problems like a hot knife through butter. Wang Zhongxi looks blankly at the Grand Secretary, hoping for a miracle. The emperor made it clear, every official named will be investigated. These are men of high status, including Grand Secretary Wei Zheod and Duke Zhu Chunchen, along with Minister of War Zhang Jingyan and Minister Fan Jingwen. Except for Fan Jingwen, everyone is panicking, because only Fan Jingwen told the truth. Wei Zheod and Zhang Jingyan step forward and kneel simultaneously, but the emperor raises a hand to stop all of them. Don't be in such a hurry, he tells them. We'll start with Vice Minister Wang. The Jinui and Eastern Depot work quickly. I expect them back in an hour. At that time, he will give Vice Minister Wang justice. Wang Jingxi's heart is like dead ashes. Wei Zheod narrows his eyes, understanding the emperor's intent. Regardless of whether the court lacks money, the emperor will use this as an excuse to raid their homes. Their wealth is their crime. Since that's the case, he decides to take a step back and give up his property to retire to his hometown. He first signals his faction with a look, then bows to the emperor. Since the emperor wishes to raid their homes, he is willing to offer all his property and resign to return home. Zhang Jingyan follows suit, kneeling and saying the exact same thing. He refuses them without hesitation. He must uncover the truth to give them justice, and it won't be too late to retire then, which, naturally, is a terrifying prospect. Li Banghua sees this and decides to add fuel to the fire. He steps forward, hands clasped, and impeaches Grand Secretary Wei Zheod. He claims the man is unfit for his post, forming factions and embezzling military funds. He asks the emperor to investigate. Others immediately join in, shouting their support. Led by Li Banghua, over 20 officials, acting like human repeaters, step forward to demand an investigation into Wei Zheod. Wei Zheod's face turns very ugly. He thought resigning would save him, but he didn't expect the emperor to be so relentless. What now? Wei Zheod's eyes sweep across the court, looking for any force he can unite with. He won't give up easily. The more desperate the situation, the more he must find a way to survive. When he sees Duke Zhu Chunchen kneeling on the ground, he is overjoyed. We should note that in the Ming Dynasty, dukes are few and far between. A rare breed, indeed. With a duke standing in front of him, he is certain the emperor wouldn't let things get out of hand. Thinking this, he shoots a look at Zhu Chunchen. Zhu Chunchen, who had also been named and was panicking, is delighted to see the Grand Secretary signaling him. After forming a united front, the two men stand up simultaneously. Wei Zheod cups his hands toward all the officials, both those named and those not. He reminds them that the rebels are at the gates, and they are in urgent need of men. Yet the emperor wants to raid their homes. He claims that if a ruler wants to frame a minister, he can always find a pretext. If he raids one home today, he will raid another tomorrow. Once the entire court is stripped bare, he wonders if the emperor will start digging up their ancestral graves. He calls it tragic and pitiful. His own death is of no consequence, but he hopes everyone remembers this. Wei Zheod has no real talent, but because he is a smooth talker, he actually became the Grand Secretary during the emperor's reign. Isn't that laughable? The emperor orders his men to take Wei Zheod away. Take him down. Wang Qinzhen is the first to step forward. As a loyal eunuch, he feels he must defend the emperor's dignity. Outside, the imperial guards push The doors open and enter. Seeing that the man they are ordered to seize is the Grand Secretary himself, they hesitate and look toward the emperor. Without direct orders from the emperor, they dare not act rashly. They might ignore Wang Qinjin or even the guard commanders, but they must obey that one man implicitly. We see the officials' gazes shifting nervously between the emperor and Wei Zayod. They are waiting, though they don't really care whether Wei Zayod's home is raided or not. What truly worries them is whether the emperor will raid every official's house for funds. If that's the case, they might as well unite and resist. The emperor knows exactly what they are waiting for. In this era, a ruler holds absolute power and can, at any time, strip a subject of everything, including their life. But there is a catch. He needs a legitimate crime. With a proper accusation, he can silence the officials, the scholars, and the common people alike. Realizing this, the emperor gives a cold smile. Framing someone with a clever label? Well, that is something he knows quite well. He flicks his sleeve, hands behind his back, his gaze scanning the room like a blade. Gentlemen, he begins, you are all officials of our great Ming. Among you, some are brave, some are silver-tongued, some are naturally sycophantic, and others are naturally treacherous. Some love wealth, some have their vices, some seek fame. I am but one man. Whom should I trust to gain my trust? Some of you unite to deceive me. Others unite simply to survive. And so, we have these endless factional struggles. Whether it is the Yin faction or the Donglin faction, I am well aware of them all. As long as you can actually get things done and act sincerely for the good of great Ming, I can overlook your little private hobbies. The officials are clever men. They immediately grasp the underlying threat in the emperor's words. In the emperor's eyes, no one here is clean. If he so chooses, he can find a crime for anyone. Realizing this, the entire court lowers its head in unison. But then, the emperor's tone shifts sharply. Wei Zayod has been in the cabinet since the 16th year, yet he has achieved absolutely nothing, only proposing that the officials should donate. Such a talentless, virtueless man has neither served the people nor devised a single strategy to save the nation. Occupying such a high position without doing the work is a betrayal of both ruler and country. Does he not deserve death? As Grand Secretary, he formed factions, embezzled military funds, and deceived the throne with his arrogant, treasonous words. By law, he should face death by 1,000 cuts. However, the emperor notes his years of service. Even if there was no merit, there was effort. And so, in his infinite mercy, the emperor decides to give him one last chance. The emperor asks what he is so afraid of. He isn't trying to rob the man, but the math simply doesn't add up. A grand secretary's salary is a pittance, yet in just 4 years, this man has amassed a fortune. We see the emperor's gaze settle on Wei Zayod. Wei Zayod's face pales instantly. To a man like him, his wealth is his only real concern and his greatest liability. It wouldn't even take the secret police to find the discrepancy. Any servant could see the books don't match. But in this court, honesty is a rare commodity. If he hadn't been corrupt, he never would have survived long enough to reach the top. The emperor continues his cold interrogation. He notes that a subject who refuses to share his sovereign's burdens is utterly useless. In normal times, a simple dismissal would be enough. But these are not normal times. The emperor smiles coldly and gives the order. There will be no mercy today. He orders Wei Zayod to be dragged out for execution. His bloodline is to be ended, and every cent of his fortune confiscated. The hall grows deathly quiet. Wei Zayod stands frozen, unable to believe how quickly his world has turned to ash. One moment, he was the most powerful official in the land. The next, he is a man without a future. He truly didn't think the emperor would dare. Not only is he to die, but his entire family is to be erased. Nearby, the commander of the guards, Li Ruoyan, keeps his head low. He isn't trembling with fear, but with a sense of grim satisfaction. Finally, the emperor is dealing with the rod in the court. When the guards hesitate, Li Ruoyan barks a sharp command. He has no patience for those who move slowly against traitors. The guard sees Wei Zayod and begin dragging him away. The former grand secretary finally finds his voice, but his composure is gone. His mind has completely collapsed under the weight of the sentence. He begs his fellow officials to speak up for him. The Minister of War, Zhang Jingyan, remains silent. He knows that trying to save a sinking ship will only pull him under two. In this environment, Wei Zayod is already a dead man. To help him now would be a foolish waste of political capital. The fallen official now has only one purpose left, to serve as a warning to everyone else in the room. The other ministers exchange nervous glances, weighing their options. To speak up is to invite the same fire upon themselves. In any other situation, they might have protested. But today, the emperor has made it clear that the old rules no longer apply. Our story continues as the emperor splits the court in two, using the crown prince's move to Nanjing to force everyone's hand. When it came time to borrow money, he specifically called out Wei Zayod, Zhang Jingyan, Zhu Chunchen, and Fan Jingwen. Though they held high offices, these four shared nothing but mutual dislike, and Wei Zayod had only been in power for 6 months. The officials who weren't named decided to play it safe, watching from the sidelines to see which way the wind would blow. By making an example of Wei Zayod, the emperor made his stance clear. Everyone is guilty, but he chooses who to ignore. We might ask if anyone truly wanted to save him. Some did, of course, but pleading for mercy is a delicate art. The ministers wanted to help, yet no one dared to be the first to speak. After all, the first bird always gets shot. Stepping forward now would mean catching the emperor's full fury, which, to be honest, would likely be worse than execution. While these old foxes of the court hesitated, the sound of a broken, irrational Wei Zhaode cursing the emperor drifted in from outside. He screamed that Zhu Yujian was a faint-hearted ruler whose 17 years of incompetence would finally destroy the Ming dynasty. The shouting was cut short by the secret police. A moment later, a guard returned to report that the execution was finished. The hall became so quiet one could hear a pin drop. Duke Zhu Chunxian suddenly realized he was the only one still standing. He tried to kneel as quietly as possible, hoping no one would notice, but the emperor simply watched him with a cold sneer. Zhu Chunxian trembled, his breath hitching as he weakly claimed he had only stood up to try and silence Wei Zhaode's insults. The emperor gave a dismissive laugh. In his mind, the duke was already a dead man. He then asked who should fill the vacancy. He invited the kneeling officials to recommend a new grand secretary, but they all remained silent, exchanging nervous glances. Wei Zhaode had been a top scholar 13 years ago, starting his journey as a modest official of the 6th rank. In less than 4 years, he had risen to the 2nd rank, reaching the very top of the imperial cabinet by the 17th year. It was the fastest promotion in the history of the Ming dynasty, a truly remarkable career if one ignores the ending. He was also the grand secretary who met the most pathetic end. Now, that high-ranking seat looked more like a death sentence. To the civil and military officials, the emperor now seemed more terrifying than the rebels themselves. Seeing their silence, he proposed that Censor Li Banghua join the cabinet as the new grand secretary. Hearing this, the court officials finally breathed a collective sigh of relief. Led by 3 cabinet members, they knelt and praised the emperor's divine wisdom, which, to be honest, was mostly just relief that they weren't next. He nodded, appointing Li Banghua as the grand secretary effective immediately. As for the vacancy in the Ministry of Personnel, he decided to take a moment to consider his options. We should remember that the late Wei Zhaode had held that post since early February, after the previous minister, Li Yuji, had retired due to illness. With Wei Zhaode gone, the position was empty, and it seemed likely that Zhang Jingyan, the Minister of War, would soon face his own unexpected complication. The emperor's gaze swept across the hall like a cold wind before he finally made up his mind. Zhang Jingyan, he called out, do you plead guilty? Zhang Jingyan had been waiting for those words with bated breath. He collapsed to the floor, his voice trembling with sorrow as he confessed his crimes and begged for mercy. Since he had confessed, the emperor stripped him of his rank as Minister of War to await further punishment. Zhang thanked him profusely, clearly relieved to still have his head. From that day on, Li Banghua left his post as censor to become the Minister of War and a Grand Secretary. It was a heavy burden, but someone had to carry it. He then appointed Qiu Yu to the Ministry of Personnel, while Fan Jingwen took over the Ministries of Works and Rights, and Fang Yuegong was tasked with the Ministry of Revenue. Your Majesty is wise, the officials chanted in unison. Led by the 4 cabinet members, the entire assembly bowed to show their absolute obedience to his will. Seeing that no one dared to oppose him, the emperor finally allowed himself a quiet sigh of relief. This arrangement was quite calculated, you see. Li Banghua was an expert in military affairs, making him the perfect fit for the Ministry of War. Meanwhile, Qiu Yu was known for his loyalty and lack of factional ties. That made him the ideal candidate to manage the Ministry of Personnel. As for Fan Jingwen, his reputation for honesty was essential for the Ministry of Works, where the money usually vanished. The Ministry of Rights was hardly a priority in these desperate times, so anyone could handle it. But the Ministry of Revenue, that was the real challenge. For that, he chose Fang Yuegong, a man famous for his integrity. The Ministry of Revenue desperately needed such a man, especially since the post had been vacant for some time. Ever since Ni Yuanlu resigned, the ministry's affairs had been handled by Wang Jingfi. The emperor ordered them all to return to their offices and perform their duties without delay. We obey your command, they replied. Those who hadn't been called were dismissed, while the cabinet and the Duke of Xiangqing were ordered to stay behind. The unnamed officials fled as if they had received a royal pardon, hurrying out before the emperor changed his mind. Deep down, they knew their hands weren't clean. If the emperor ever decided to investigate them, he would surely find plenty of dirt. He then led the cabinet toward the heavenly hall, leaving the rest to wait in silence. He tells them they can only leave once Wu Mengming and Wang Zhixing return. One official begs for mercy, desperately bringing up his ancestors' past merits. Spare me, he cries. Amidst these desperate pleas, the emperor leaves the Hall of Supreme Harmony, giving a final, pointed instruction to Li Ruoyan. Give them food and drink, he instructs. But if anyone tries to leave without my permission, execute them. Once outside, he finally takes a deep breath. In the history books, the Emperor Chongzhen always claimed his ministers had failed him. He hadn't quite believed it before, but now he was absolutely certain. In a peaceful era, he might have looked the other way regarding their greed. But with war and famine everywhere, the Ming dynasty had no more blood to spare. If the bleeding continued, the nation would simply cease to exist. He decided he would do what the original Chongzhen couldn't. He would be the one to strike. He would bear the weight of the infamy, no matter how heavy it became. From now on, the imperial court would be a battlefield of its own. Historically, emperors allowed a bit of corruption as a way to keep their officials in check. It's an old trick of kingship, controlling men through their base desires. Whether it's money, lust, or power, everyone has a price they are willing to pay. Only the dead have no needs. After all, for these officials, the greed wasn't just about the money. It was about the thrill of the corruption itself. Those who sought power simply loved the feeling of being feared. Every emperor draws his own line, and that line determines what kind of men serve him. This is why officials from a previous era often meet such a grim end when a new ruler arrives. Usually, it's just that the new emperor has higher standards. A truly wise monarch satisfies his subjects' darker side, while making sure they know exactly where the line is. But the current situation was far too dire for that. To find the money he needed, he had to use the corrupt as his source. Upon reaching the side hall, he immediately called for a private meeting with Manhwa. He didn't even wait for the doors to close before diving into the heart of the matter. The rebels were coming, the treasury was dry, and they needed soldiers now. "As you command, Your Majesty," Manhwa replied, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He looked up, and though he kept his expression neutral, deep down, he was still plagued by worry. The Ming dynasty lacked nothing but money, and now that they finally had some, the rebels were nearly at the gates. He suggested that since they had funds, perhaps the house seizures could wait. After all, such desperate measures only provide a moment of relief. To him, it was like drinking poison to quench a thirst. "I have everything under control," the emperor assured him, asking for the recruitment plan instead. Manhwa suggested they start by paying the long-overdue wages of the 3 great battalions, followed by a bonus for the city guard, even if they weren't elite. They were familiar with firearms and bows, far better than commoners. He then orders over 100 recruitment points to be set up across the capital. The plan is to pay the young 4 taels and the older guards 3. "What does Your Majesty think?" he asks. The emperor nods, then shakes his head. The first part is fine, but he finds the recruitment conditions far too strict. This time, they must loosen the rules. If a man can pick up a brick, he's in. Manhwa's white beard trembles in surprise. He asks, quite confused, why the emperor would abandon the tradition of only recruiting the young and healthy. The emperor only offers a bitter smile. He knows the rules, of course, but the capital is currently being ravaged by a relentless plague. Forget the young and strong. How many people are even left to fight? Manhwa looks up, a complex shadow crossing his sunken eyes. It's a grim realization. The Ming's enemies aren't just rebels, but plague and corruption as well. With a heavy heart, Manhwa kneels and takes his leave. Next, we meet Xiaoyu. Having just been promoted to Minister of Personnel, he arrives radiating excitement and a newfound sense of purpose. "Prepare yourself," the emperor tells him. "I intend to restart the Jinsha evaluations." At the mention of those 2 words, Xiaoyu's excitement vanishes instantly. With rebels at the gates, one would think the court should be united. To Xiaoyu, restarting these evaluations now, well, it felt like the emperor was sabotaging himself. Besides, the Jinsha had changed over the years. In theory, the system was sound, designed to ensure officials performed their duties for the good of the realm. It was meant to be a tool for governance, a way to ensure every man in office was actually contributing to the state's survival. But in practice, officials used it to purge their rivals. Even those who hated politics were forced to pick a side just to keep their heads. "Your Majesty, is this really the right time for such a move?" Xiaoyu asks carefully. The emperor's response is sharp. "Are you trying to tell me how to do my job?" Xiaoyu immediately drops to his knees, begging for the emperor to calm his anger. The emperor simply smiles. He knows exactly what he's doing. "I know it's not the time to start yet," he explains, "which is why I want you to prepare now." Xiaoyu is left utterly baffled by the request. Usually, these evaluations are just a matter of checking records for promotions or demotions. Since the Ministry of Personnel keeps all the files, what was there to prepare? "Please enlighten me, Your Majesty," he asks. The emperor tells him to find the officials with the best records, and specifically, those they had recommended for outside posts. "Organize the names and bring the list to me," he commands. "I have a specific use for them." After that, we see the arrival of Feng Yuegong. The Ministry of Revenue is a nightmare of a job, which explains why they needed 5 vice ministers just to keep it running. The Ministry of Revenue actually has 1 more vice minister than the Ministry of War. The emperor asks Feng Yuegong if he knows why he was chosen for this task, noting that Feng is a very clever man. Feng adjusts his official cap and says, quite seriously, that His Majesty is a wise ruler with a keen eye for talent. This bit of flattery not only pleases the emperor, but also makes Feng look good. Scholars certainly have a way with words. The emperor asks if he isn't afraid of being accused of using glib talk. Feng replies that a great ruler is far too magnanimous to hold such things against a subordinate. The emperor is amused by the response and laughs. After regaining his composure, he turns and asks if Feng is from the Huguang region. Feng confirms he is from Guqing. When the emperor notes that most Huguang officials belong to the Chu faction, Feng feels a sudden, icy chill down his spine. His legs feel weak, and he quietly swallows his nerves. He claims he isn't sure, but we know the late Ming factions were incredibly complex. The Chu faction was mostly Huguang men, while the Hui and Jia factions represented the coastal regions. Then there were the Qi and Jin factions. These groups were almost always backed by powerful merchant interests. The Chu faction, for instance, was closely tied to the grain traders. The Hui merchants dealt in salt and tea, while the Jin merchants had the widest reach, handling everything from salt to grain transport. They were involved in mining and every border trade route. It was a cycle of collusion. Merchants funded the officials, and officials cleared the path for profit. They were bleeding the empire dry while simultaneously cursing the emperor. The emperor stares at Fong and asks a pointed question. He mentions hearing that Fong is quite close with the Chu faction. Fong immediately drops to the floor in a deep, respectful bow. The emperor simply pats his shoulder. He knew all along. In fact, that's why he put him in charge of the Ministry of Revenue. He points out how the Chu faction's salt laws made merchants rich, while the imperial treasury lost over 1 million taels in taxes every year. The Chu faction managed to do exactly what their rivals only dreamed of. It was a classic case of enriching the few at the expense of the many. But let's focus on the present. Fong blinks, realizing the intent. The emperor promises to allocate 1.5 million taels to his ministry. He asks how Fong plans to spend it. Fong clears his throat and notes that since the situation is dire, the money is desperately needed. He suggests giving the entire sum to the Ministry of War to stabilize the army. The emperor shakes his head and suggests 1.2 million instead. The remaining 300,000 is for the Ministry of Works. The emperor warns him that he wasn't hired just to spend money, but to find a way to make it. The emperor tells him to find a way to make money and submit a proposal upon his return. As he watches Fong Yuegong's retreating figure, he lets out a cold, calculating smile. To the emperor, whether Fong is truly part of the Chu faction is irrelevant. What matters is that in the eyes of everyone else, he certainly appears to be. Once his new policies step on the toes of other groups, they will see it as an attack from the Chu faction. It is, quite simply, a game of dog-eat-dog. And while they fight, the emperor will sit back and reap the rewards. Fong is a clever man, so he will surely follow the plan. After he departs, Fan Jingwen enters the side hall. Although he is nearing the twilight of his years, he moves with a surprising, brisk energy. His eyes are sharp and his back is straight. He approaches the dragon throne with a worried expression and bows deeply. The emperor tells Minister Fan not to take his earlier harsh words in court to heart. Fan replies that helping to eliminate the traitor Wei was one of the greatest joys of his life. His voice, we notice, sounds remarkably energized. He had long despised Wei's behavior, and seeing the man sent to his death today brought him an immense sense of satisfaction. To be honest, he was thrilled. The emperor mentions he has 2 tasks for him. Fan bows and declares that he would handle 20 or even 200 tasks to ease his ruler's burdens. The emperor reveals his plan. He wants to appoint Fan as the governor of the capital garrison. This, as it turns out, is a massive shift in tradition. Fan Jingwen looks up in utter shock. The capital garrison consists of 3 major camps, the 5 armies, the Shinshu, and the Shinji. They are the primary force defending the capital. Since the Jiajing era, this command was strictly reserved for high-ranking nobles, at the very least, a count. Handing this power to a scholar like Fan is a monumental gesture. Realizing the rebels are closing in, Fan doesn't dare refuse the responsibility. The emperor tells him to work without fear, promising his full support. Fan Jingwen, moved to tears, kneels and performs a solemn kowtow. Such trust is rare in these desperate times. The emperor tells the old minister there is no need for such rigid formality at his age. He personally walks over to help Fan Jingwen up. Before moving to the second task, he asks if Fan knows 2 specific men. The names are Jiao Su and Tang Ruowang. Despite his age, Fan's memory is excellent, and he identifies Jiao Su as an official from the Ministry of Works. Tang Ruowang is a Westerner, also serving in the Ministry of Works. Together with Jiao Su, he has been researching the development of firearms. The emperor instructs Fan to meet them at the armory in an hour. He has important matters to discuss regarding their work. Deep down, Fan begins to feel a sense of doubt. With the rebels nearly at the gates, he wonders how they could possibly develop new weapons in time. We see Li Guozhen entering the main hall with powerful, hurried steps after being summoned. He is the Earl of Xianqing, a title held by his family since the 4th year of the Jiangwen era. Li Guozhen represents the 11th generation of his lineage, and at only 26 years old, the young earl is quite an imposing figure. Standing 5.5 feet tall, his robust muscles fill out his court robes perfectly, giving off a strange, almost inexplicable sense of security. However, we shouldn't be fooled by his impressive appearance. Historically, while Li Guozhen was quite eloquent, he lacked the actual talent for leading troops or battlefield command. To be perfectly honest, his strategic skills were non-existent, though his loyalty was certainly beyond reproach. As the governor of the capital garrison, he oversees the 3 major camps, and he is quite close with his men. Yet, of his 40,000 soldiers, half have never even touched a firearm. Although guns are standard equipment for the Shinji camp, regulations state that all garrison soldiers must be proficient in their use. Faced with such weak combat readiness, he wears a long, miserable face and confesses that the strength of the 3 camps is utterly depleted. He admits that as governor, he bears the full responsibility for this failure. But the emperor tells the earl not to blame himself for these deep-rooted issues. These flaws aren't his fault, and the emperor has no intention of punishing him for speaking the truth. Li Guozhen only took command in August of the 16th year of the Chongzhen era. His predecessor was Zhu Chunxin, the Duke of Chun. Naturally, the blame for the garrison's state lies with Zhu, not with Li Guozhen. Realizing he isn't in trouble, Li Guozhen breathes a sigh of relief and asks why His Majesty has summoned him today. The emperor calls him a pillar of the Ming and reveals his plan. He wants Li to go to Nanjing to assist the crown prince. Li Guozhen gulps nervously. His first reaction isn't joy, but caution, as he knows all too well how fickle and suspicious his ruler can be. He offers to stay and fight the rebels instead, begging the emperor to send someone else to assist the prince before performing a solemn kowtow. The emperor simply smiles and clarifies that this is an order, not a suggestion. He tells the earl to go home and pack his things immediately. He is to depart tonight and serve the prince faithfully in Nanjing. Li Guozhen looks up, his mind racing as he tries to process the situation. He wonders if this offer is genuine or a trap, but soon he has his answer. On November 19th, the emperor grants him a prestigious new title. He is appointed as the junior guardian of the heir apparent. These high-ranking positions are traditionally responsible for the education and care of the prince. While the preceptor teaches literature and the tutor handles martial arts, the guardian is tasked with ensuring the prince's absolute safety. These are technically deputy roles, and while they are mostly honorary titles without real power, they ensure these men are the first ones called upon to guide the crown prince. Realizing the weight of this, Li Guozhen stops hesitating and immediately kneels to accept the decree, thanking the emperor for the honor of the mission to Nanjing. This journey is no small matter, and the emperor makes it clear that everything depends on the earl, who solemnly vows not to betray this sacred trust. Once Li Guozhen departs, we see the emperor slump onto the dragon throne, utterly exhausted and no longer caring for the rigid etiquette of the court. He views the Ming Empire as a tangled knot that must be painstakingly unraveled if it is to be saved. Otherwise, he knows all too well that history will simply repeat itself. At this point, he neither expects nor wants his officials to take the lead, believing that saving the capital requires everyone to follow his specific vision. While the historical Chongzhen micromanaged his elite forces into ruin, our emperor must now micromanage this ragtag group of soldiers to hold back the rebels. Wang Qinan enters the room only to find the emperor leaning against the dragon throne in a rather undignified, exaggerated posture. It is a rare moment of informality for a ruler, but the weight of an empire tends to do that to a man, to be perfectly honest. The emperor takes the ledger, noting the 40,000 ingots of silver and 1,000 ingots of gold that have been collected. After calculating the total at roughly 2.2 million taels, he orders 1.5 million to be sent to the Ministry of Revenue, while the rest stays with him. This leaves poor Wang Qinan quite confused, as imperial funds are traditionally handled by the inner treasury through a very specific set of regulations. Even though this is the emperor's private wealth to use as he pleases, the inner treasury usually manages the flow to ensure there is no room for theft or corruption. Regardless, the emperor insists the silver be kept in the Qianqing palace, even ordering the existing 40,000 taels from the treasury to be moved there as well. With that settled, he asks if Gao Shiming has returned yet, the powerful director of ceremonial who oversees the 24 offices of the inner court. Gao Shiming holds a rank even higher than Wang Qinan and is one of the few people the emperor truly trusts, a trust that was historically well placed. In another timeline, when the capital fell, Gao Shiming chose to end his own life rather than surrender, proving his absolute loyalty to the throne. He had been sent to Shandong to deliver silver to Lu Ziqing, a general who was currently faking an injury from a horse fall to avoid duty. Just the thought of Lu Ziqing makes the emperor's blood boil, as this general was notorious for killing civilians and claiming they were enemy rebels. He was a man without honor who allowed his troops to pillage and burn, always finding a way to shift the blame onto the rebels whenever he was questioned. He would send assassins and then use heavy bribes to silence the court, turning major crimes into minor ones. And right now, he has 15,000 troops. If those soldiers could actually be made to follow orders, they would be a formidable force. Your Majesty, Gao Shiming is outside awaiting your command. It seems Gao didn't dare disturb the emperor's rest earlier. This realization brings a touch of pity, as very few people in the Ming Empire truly wish the emperor well. Aside from a few in the harem and the court, these eunuchs are all he has left. Let him in, the emperor commands. Obeying the order, Gao Shiming quickly enters the hall, kneeling to offer the traditional, long-winded greeting to the Son of Heaven. We see that Gao is strikingly pale, giving off the slight impression of a man who has been dead for 3 days, though his features are quite refined. Aside from his high-pitched voice, he looks like any other man. Did you see Lu Ziqing? The emperor asks. I did, your majesty. He shows no sign of injury. He is faking, as I suspected, the emperor notes calmly. Did he offer you any silver? At this, a chill runs down Gao Shiming's spine. He wonders how the emperor could possibly know what happened hundreds of miles away, and quickly pulls a package from his robes, holding it high. This is the silver he gave me, your majesty. I haven't touched a single coin. To his surprise, the emperor simply tells him it's fine to keep it. Deep down, the emperor knows that if Gao hadn't taken the bribe, his next move would be impossible. Seeing Gao's confusion, he begins to explain. Since Lu Ziqing has no desire to come to Beijing, the emperor decides they shall send him to Nanjing instead. We then learn about the middle decree, a shortcut that bypasses the usual, tedious bureaucratic process involving the ministries and the Grand Secretariat. Normally, the Secretariat drafts the edict while the ministries provide legal counsel, ensuring nothing contradicts the ancestral laws of the land. If the emperor approves, it goes to the Directorate of Ceremonial to be verified and stamped, a process that ensures everything is strictly by the book. After that, it returns to the Secretariat before being sent off to the censorate for further oversight. Once signed and sealed by the inner court, it becomes official. A middle decree, however, skips the ministries and the Secretariat entirely. In the Ming Dynasty, ignoring a formal decree meant a grim end, but ignoring an informal one was often seen as a badge of honor by some officials. In fact, if the emperor tried to punish someone for ignoring such a decree, the court officials would likely rush to the offender's defense. Gao Shiming considers this for a moment. Your Majesty, if Lu Ziqing already refused a formal order, he might simply ignore an informal one to go to Nanjing. The emperor offers a thin smile, noting that with Lu's cowardly nature, he'll likely be overjoyed. He is to wait at Taimen Pass in 2 days. There, he will board a ship for Nanjing alongside the crown prince. Meanwhile, Gao Shiming has just returned from Jinan, utterly exhausted. All he wants is a warm meal and a long sleep, but the emperor's next words snap him back to full attention. It is nearly noon, the emperor says. Eat quickly, then set out immediately. Gao Shiming bows, though as he turns to leave, he casts a slightly envious glance at Wang Qinjian. It's a bitter pill to swallow. Though Wang's rank is lower, he remains constantly at the emperor's side. That kind of proximity and trust, as we know, is something money simply cannot buy. The plan moves forward. Lu Ziqing is promoted 3 ranks and gifted 1,000 gold. But Wang Qinjian worries that Lu's massive army makes him untouchable. He cautiously voices his concern. The emperor knows well that Lu is a difficult target. If he weren't, he would have been dealt with long ago. To kill a man like that, one needs a clever trap, and the emperor has already set the pieces. He orders a decree for the Dengjing Navy. Commander Huang Fei is to mobilize 50 ships to Taimen Pass to await the prince's arrival and escort him to Nanjing. But there is a second, secret order. Huang Fei is told that Lu Ziqing intends to kidnap the prince. His mission? Kill Lu and secure the prince. With the orders sent, the emperor reviews the board. The prince's departure for Nanjing was already a settled matter in the court. Even without the recent purge of the cabinet, this decree would have met little resistance. And in Huang Fei, the emperor has a loyal soldier. Huang Fei had spent his life fighting invaders in the north. When Beijing fell to the rebels, he led his fleet south to defend the realm. History tells us he never surrendered, even after the fall of the next emperor, choosing instead to fight until his final, tragic defeat. He was eventually killed by the Qing. The emperor is certain Huang Fei will follow orders. The only wildcard is Lu Ziqing himself. The man is cunning, and if he senses a trap, all this effort will be for nothing. So, the emperor adds one final, irresistible lure. He tells Wang Qinjian to add a postscript to both decrees. The long overdue military pay has been entrusted to the crown prince for distribution. In these lean times, every soldier in the Ming Empire is desperate for silver. With the prince and the payroll as bait, the trap is set. Even if Lu is suspicious, he won't be able to resist the silver at Taimen Pass. Go, the emperor says. Have the cabinet draft it now. The emperor orders Li Ruoyan to be summoned. Before long, Li Ruoyan arrives at the palace in his bright red court robes, his heart full of anticipation. Having seen Wu Mengming and Wang Zhixing receive their rewards, he feels it is finally his turn. Now, we should note that not every Jinyui wore the famous flying fish robes. In fact, there were robes even more prestigious, the python and the bull robes, which were special honors granted directly by the emperor himself. These garments were a mark of supreme status for both civil and military officials, much like the yellow riding jackets of the later Qing dynasty. Li Ruoyan had been a martial arts scholar since the first year of the reign. Though nearly 40, he had maintained his physique remarkably well. With lean cheeks and eyes that shone with intensity, he moved with a light, quick step, soon coming to a halt before the emperor. Li Ruoyan, commander of the Jinyui, greets your majesty. The emperor bids him rise, then asks a pointed question about the combat readiness of his 3,000 men. Li Ruoyan's expression darkens. After a long, heavy silence, he admits that the Jinyui have become little more than a hollow name. Between ghost soldiers on the payroll and widespread corruption, they can barely monitor the court, let alone face a real army in the field. Their commanders have become puppets of the Eastern Depot, and with their pay constantly delayed, the morale of the guard has utterly collapsed. The capable men have all sought fortunes elsewhere. Those who remain are mostly the old and the infirm, staying only because they have nowhere else to go. They are either desperate for a single meal or simply idling their lives away. To be honest, this report comes as no surprise to the emperor. If the Jinyui still possessed even a fraction of their former strength, the situation in the capital would be far less dire. However, they can still handle their weapons well enough. The emperor feels a small sense of relief. Even a fated Jinyui is better than the 3 great battalions. Putting internal reforms aside for a moment, he asks about a certain rebel poem. He wants to know if Li Ruoyan is familiar with its verses. Li Ruoyan hesitates, then recites the lines carefully. Seeking life and seeking peace, the poor can no longer survive. Open the gates early to welcome the Chuang King. Everyone is joyful, slaughtering sheep and bringing wine. When the Chuang King comes, he brings an end to the grain tax. No more taxes, and everyone lives happily. The emperor repeats the words to himself, letting the rhythm of the rebel propaganda sink in. He then asks Li Ruoyan a strange question. If he were to rewrite this poem, how long would it take to spread the new version through the capital? Li Ruoyan scratches his head, feeling a bit lost. He can't imagine what the emperor could possibly want with a rebel's song, but he remains attentive. He doesn't ask questions. The Jinui consists of all sorts of people, after all. He thinks for a moment before giving his answer. If it's catchy, it will take 2 days. The emperor tells him to take notes, specifically changing only the end of the verses. Li Ruoyan doesn't dare delay, taking out his paper and pen. It was an old Jinui tradition he had never forgotten. He never forgot that duty. But as the emperor recites the new lines about welcoming the Chuang King, Li Ruoyan nearly collapses. If they weren't in the palace, he would have suspected this emperor was an impostor. This was practically rebel propaganda. Your Majesty, is this wise? He barely dared to ask, but the emperor simply told him to wait for the ending. Kill the sons and steal the wives. Burn the homes and the grain. They come fast and leave in a hurry, leaving behind a land of good men who don't farm, letting it go to waste until the whole family is in tears. The emperor notes it's catchy and orders him to have it sung throughout the capital. As Li Ruoyan prepares to leave, we see the emperor stand. In his patched dragon robe, he walks slowly toward the commander. He intends to whisper, but Li Ruoyan suddenly drops to the floor. The pressure is immense, and he can't fathom the emperor's proximity. He wonders what the emperor could possibly want, being so close, even though not a single word has been spoken. The men I promoted today, are there any issues with them? Normally, Li Ruoyan would answer instantly, but the tension is too high. He racks his brain, recalling every detail from the morning session. Finally, he manages to say there are no problems. The second task is trickier. The emperor continues. I've decided only you are fit for it. Li Ruoyan's fear begins to fade. In its place comes a surge of excitement. Finally, a difficult mission, the chance he has been waiting for to prove his worth. He reminds the emperor that despite being nearly 40, his martial skills are as sharp as ever. He is ready for anything. Whether it's a mountain of knives or the depths of hell, he promises not to hesitate. The emperor commends his loyalty. When he asks what the task is, the emperor tells him to assassinate someone. When asked who, the answer is simple, me. Li Ruoyan is certain his ears have failed him. He scratches his head and asks for forgiveness, but the emperor repeats, assassinate me. Li Ruoyan is struck as if by lightning. He looks up in total shock, his body recoiling in disbelief as he sees the emperor's face. Li Ruoyan falls flat on the floor. Realizing how badly he's lost his composure, he scrambles to his knees, kowtowing frantically to the emperor. Forgive me, Your Majesty. I have been disrespectful, he cries, reminding the emperor that as a Jinui commander, his loyalty is absolute. He belongs only to the emperor. Even if he were given all the courage in the world, he would never dare commit such a treasonous act. Our commander assumes this is a test of his loyalty, but the emperor simply asks if he intends to disobey a direct imperial order. I would rather face the consequences of disobedience, he stammers, clearly unable to even process the nature of the request. To be honest, he simply cannot bring himself to follow such a shocking and dangerous imperial decree. The emperor asks how they can save the Ming without money, which must be taken from the hypocrites who hide their wealth. Do you understand the stakes? The emperor asks. Seeing Li's terror, he explains that the assassination is merely a performance for the public. It's an excuse to declare martial law. Naturally, the task of finding the culprit would fall to the Jinui, giving them total control. Who the culprit is, well, that would be up to you. Suddenly, Li Ruoyan sees the brilliance of the plan and is quietly impressed. He understands the logic, yet he remains terrified. The emperor is the supreme ruler. If the blade slips, the disaster would be absolute. You don't actually intend to kill me, do you? The emperor asks dryly. Li kowtows again. Then you won't fail? Just make it look real. I cannot obey, Li Ruoyan insists, still kneeling. He is terrified that even if this isn't a trap, the optics are far too dangerous. Even if it isn't a trap, being caught assassinating the emperor means his entire family would be executed. He won't take that risk. The emperor finally loses his patience. He slams his hand onto the dragon throne and stands, declaring that his life matters little compared to the state. He doesn't fear death. He fears his people starving and wandering the land. He asks why the rebels are able to keep fighting. He mentions that the rebel leader, Li Zicheng, has won the people's heart. He demands to know if Li Ruoyan understands what that truly means. It's simple, the emperor continues. Give a starving man a bowl of rice, and you own his heart. I intend to win them all. But to do that, he needs the funds for relief and tax exemptions. Without money, the Ming dynasty will simply cease to exist. Can you carry the weight of that failure? He asks. He is laying a massive burden of guilt on Li Ruoyan, who can only tremble. Li Ruoyan's scalp tingles with dread as he kneels in a long, heavy silence. Finally, he looks up, his eyes bloodshot, and addresses the emperor. Your Majesty, I accept your command, he says. Our emperor sighs in relief, telling him to handle this personally and in total secrecy. He departs with heavy steps, the weight of the task pressing down on him. To be honest, he never expected such a mission. An imperial order to assassinate the emperor himself. As he leaves, we see Wang Qingjin return from the cabinet. The emperor asks for the time. Wang Qingjin replies that it is nearly 4, with only half an hour before the treasury visit. An hour is plenty, the emperor decides. He tells Wang Qingjin to gather the princes, Empress Zhou, and the concubines. They are to meet at the palace. With court matters paused, it's time to find a backup plan for the Ming dynasty. Deep down, he isn't entirely sure he can hold Beijing. He must pave a path for the crown prince and the empire's future. Soon, the palace is filled with people. The 3 princes and the imperial family whisper, wondering what is about to happen. Earlier that year, moving the capital south had been discussed, but the emperor's own indecisiveness had stalled the plan. Now, they assume the topic is being raised again. After the princes and concubines offer their respects, they take their places. Everyone is on edge, waiting to hear their fate. They all know that while Beijing is a fortress, Nanjing is a sanctuary. Looking at this crowd of familiar strangers, the emperor steadies his heart. Sit, he says. Today we are family, not subjects. There are few seats in the hall, and no one dares to take them anyway. Instead, they quietly sit on the floor in rows. He tells them plainly, the rebel advance is unstoppable. Even Wang Qingjin admits that Beijing likely cannot be held. As soon as he finishes speaking, the quiet palace descends into chaos. In the Ming court, such talk is strictly forbidden. They had heard the rumors, of course, but hearing the truth from the emperor himself is a different matter entirely. Wang Qingjin's sharp voice calls for silence. He reminds them that since the capital moved to Beijing, the emperor has guarded the gate. It is a matter of honor and duty. The Zhu family has never feared death, and they are prepared to die for their land. His voice grows heavy as he admits the rebels are too strong. He is afraid, not for himself, but for the fate of the world. He fears the chaos will make the people suffer and that the 300-year Ming legacy will be destroyed by his own hand. He has no wish to be the ruler of a fallen nation. After weighing the options, he decides a temporary move south is the best strategy. The imperial family remains silent. Beijing is their home, and they find it hard to imagine leaving this ancestral land behind. Yet, they know that if they stay, their warm homes will become cold graves, destined to be desecrated by the approaching rebels. At that thought, some begin to sob. Grief is contagious, it seems, and soon the palace is filled with the sound of weeping. Our emperor watches them with a cold, expressionless face. To be honest, he finds the imperial family to be far too weak. While countless commoners have perished in disasters, these royals cry simply because they must leave home. It is a stark contrast. He thinks of the nameless graves in the wilderness and the bones scattered under broken bridges. He declares that he will stay to defend Beijing while the crown prince travels to Nanjing to serve as the regent. If the emperor dies for the country, the prince will take the throne there. For a moment, a heavy silence falls over the hall. They all assumed he would lead the retreat himself. No one expected him to stay and guard the gates, not even the young Zhu Zilong. Despite his youth, Zhu Zilong is quite sensible. He kneels, begging his father to reconsider and seek safety in the south. Prince Yong and Prince Ding join the plea, and soon the concubines are also on their knees, begging the emperor to leave. The hall is filled with desperate cries for him to change his mind. It is, quite frankly, a scene of absolute chaos. Wang Qingjin catches the emperor's eye and calls for silence, his voice trembling. He will support his master's decision, no matter what. The noise dies down instantly. With a cold, unwavering expression, the emperor declares that his mind is made up. The prince tries to speak again, but Empress Zhou stops him. She knows that at a time like this, his mind cannot be changed. Then, Empress Zhou steps forward. Her voice is soft, yet it carries a surprising strength as she asks to stay and fight by his side. Now, the empress wasn't what many would call a standard beauty of the time, as the fashion then favored a fuller figure. But Empress Zhou was different, slender, with skin as pale as jade and features that were remarkably delicate. She looked like a painting in her white gown, exuding a dignified aura that fits modern aesthetic standards perfectly. Seeing that Empress Zhou refused to leave, noble consort Yuan also took a small step forward to speak. She feared that if they met rebels, or if their escort betrayed them, the fate of the palace women would be tragic. Even reaching Nanjing meant a life of lonely isolation. Better to stay by his side, through life and death. Noble consort Yuan was equally stunning, but our emperor had no mind for such things. He could hardly argue now. He simply waved his hand and told Wang Qingjin to notify Rinshou Palace. Empress Yan needed to prepare for Nanjing. This empress was his sister-in-law, the widow of Emperor Tianqi, honored with the title of Yan after his passing. She had moved to Rinshou Palace during the crown prince's wedding, leaving her original residence behind. Wang Qingjin hurried to the palace himself. The emperor then dismissed the others, keeping only the crown prince behind. The crowd left the palace of heavenly purity with heavy hearts. Soon, only the emperor and the prince remained. He looked at Zhu Zilong with a complex gaze. Suddenly having a grown son felt strange. Calling him son felt almost too bold. The prince knelt before him. After a moment, the emperor asked, "If Beijing falls and I die, what will you do?" The prince replied that the son of heaven is protected by the gods. Our emperor told him to stop the flattery. To be honest, if every emperor were truly protected by heaven, dynasties would never fall. It was a bit much. The prince was terrified by his father's tone and knelt trembling. One wrong word now could lead to total ruin. Since the boy didn't know, the emperor decided to tell him. He stood tall, radiating a cold, imperial authority. He declared that if he died, the prince's first priority must not be seeking revenge. Zhu Zilong looked up, shaken. The prince admitted he didn't understand. The emperor warned him, never ally with the northern invaders to fight the rebels. He ordered the prince to destroy the invaders first, then the rebels. The prince agreed, though he was utterly bewildered. Logically, if the emperor died at Li Zicheng's hands, the grudge should have been a matter of absolute national hatred. Since its founding, the Ming dynasty had championed filial piety as the core of governance. To the world, raising an army against Li Zicheng was the ultimate act of loyalty and filial duty. It was, as they say, perfectly justified. Even if our emperor ignored the rebels, would the court and the people ever allow it? There are no buts. He glared at the prince, his voice sharp. A kingdom might fall, but its people must not be extinguished if the invaders enter the pass. Do you really think Li Zicheng is a match for the 8 banners? Prince Zhu Zilong said nothing. To him, if the rebels could fight all the way from Shanxi, their strength had to be formidable. The northern invaders were skilled, yes, but they only had 100,000 men. Li Zicheng claimed to have 500,000. In the prince's mind, they could practically drown the enemy in spit. Seeing this stubbornness, the emperor felt a deep sense of frustration. The boy's head was filled with nothing but old textbooks. Our emperor, however, knew the truth about Li Zicheng's forces. Never mind that the numbers were inflated. At least half of them were a disorganized rabble. In an era of cold steel, there is a massive gulf between a true elite and a common mob. Elite units possess a steady morale, capable of enduring heavy losses without breaking. They can fight through the worst conditions and even launch a counterattack. But Li Zicheng's peasants, in an open field, once they start losing, a total collapse is merely a matter of time. Panic spreads like a plague, from 1 to 10, then to thousands. At that point, even 1,000,000 men are useless. The only reason the rebels reached Xuanfu was that they hadn't faced a real challenge yet. They were fighting sieges, not open field battles. And the 8 banners? They were masters of the open field. To prove his point, the emperor asked if the prince knew of Zhou Yuji at Ningwu Pass. With only a few thousand men, Zhou Yuji had inflicted 80,000 casualties on the rebels. Thinking of such a man, the emperor sighed. With generals either dead or defecting, he was running out of loyal men. To be honest, Ningwu Pass was naturally easy to defend, making the rebel losses expected. Zhu Zilong argued his point, still unconvinced. It was then the emperor realized why his predecessors never let a prince rule the south alone. The boy simply wasn't ready to carry the weight of the empire. He stomped his foot, declaring the prince unworthy of his title. The rebel Li was good at taking cities, but useless in the field. Against the invaders, he would be crushed instantly. If he won, perhaps things would be fine. But a defeat would hand the north to the invaders, bringing a total catastrophe upon their civilization. Seeing his father's growing rage, Zhu Zilong fell silent and knelt. After a long, tense moment, the emperor's gaze softened slightly, and he let out a weary sigh. Zhu Zilong was only 16, and while he needed time to grow, the emperor realized there was no time left to train the Ming prince. He had to find a way to surround the boy with capable advisors. Patting Zhu Zilong's shoulder, he said that if the capital fell, he would disappear, leaving a letter claiming that enemy spies had poisoned him. This would give the prince a legitimate reason to launch a holy war. Historically, only a war with a righteous cause can truly win the people's hearts. When the invaders first arrived, Wu Sangui led the way, with the 8 banners behind him, claiming they were there to avenge the emperor. The unsuspecting commoners welcomed them, leading to the north's rapid collapse. But once the southern Ming court was established, the people realized the revenge was merely a change of masters. And they were cruel masters at that. Only then did the resistance begin. Had the southern Ming not been crippled by internal strife, the invaders might never have reached Nanjing. If the war goes poorly, he told the boy, unite with the rebels. This was the strategy the emperor provided. He patted the prince's shoulder once more, asking if he remembered. Zhu Zilong kowtowed, swearing that while a kingdom might fall, the people must remain. The emperor made him repeat those words. At first, Zhu Zilong's voice was thin and hesitant as he spoke of the kingdom and its people. But slowly, his voice grew loud and full of conviction. By the end, the boy's words were sharp, carrying a hint of blood and fury. Satisfied with this display, the emperor patted his shoulder one last time, left a note, and walked out of the palace without looking back. As we watch the emperor's figure fade, Zhu Zilong is left with a sudden, overwhelming sense of loneliness. Just moments ago, he was a student of kingship, and now he was being sent to Nanjing alone. To be honest, he was completely unprepared for this burden. Yet, those of royal blood do not shrink away. He wiped his eyes, kowtowed toward his father's path, and picked up the note. He rose and slipped out through a side door. Meanwhile, Wang Qinzhen had returned and was waiting outside the hall for the emperor to emerge. As the emperor stepped out into the bright March sun, the eunuch followed closely. Despite the light, the air still held a lingering chill. They had survived a brutal winter only to face the bite of a cold spring. Wang Qinzhen looked at his master with deep concern. Every burden of the Ming dynasty rested on the shoulders of this 34-year-old man. He had reigned as emperor for 17 years, and he had been exhausted for every one of them. The empire was crumbling, but it wasn't for a lack of effort on his part. Clearly not. At times, Wang Qingjin felt a strange, unsettling illusion. The harder the emperor worked, the more chaotic the Ming dynasty became. Terrified by the thought that heaven itself might be abandoning them, he quickly cleared his mind and followed silently as a bell chimed. We hear the faint sound of a clock drifting over the palace walls, reaching the emperor's ears just as the sun hits its peak. He stopped and looked at the sky, realizing time was moving far too quickly. There were so many things to do, yet not nearly enough time to do them. Wang Qingjin suggested it was time for lunch, but the emperor simply stood in silence. He had no appetite. He had entrusted the prince with his plans, but he couldn't help but worry about the boy's future. He feared the civil officials would waste time with endless arguments, forcing the prince to focus on internal politics instead of the enemy. He realized he needed to surround the boy with loyal, capable men. Just then, a young eunuch came running toward Wang Qingjin and knelt, reporting that the Grand Secretary, Manhwa, had sent a letter. With a nod from the emperor, the eunuch took the message. He scanned the contents before holding the letter high. It was the list of officials who would accompany the prince to Nanjing. The emperor took the list and began to read carefully. He needed men who possessed both talent and unwavering loyalty. After the recent struggle to raise funds, he was more certain than ever that capability without loyalty was utterly useless. In fact, loyalty was often the more important of the two. Nanjing's court was incomplete, but the situation there was incredibly complex. He knew Zhu Zilong couldn't handle those veteran officials alone. He needed men who could stabilize the court, or the prince would be stripped of his power. The list included names like Lu Wenbing, Lu Wenyao, Yang Chongshan, and Zhang Qingshan. It also featured the imperial son-in-law Meng Yongbu and the former minister Enai Yuanlu. Seeing these names, the emperor finally felt relieved. He nodded in approval. In another life, these were the men who chose death over surrender, true martyrs for the crown. His only worry was whether the Nanjing officials would accept them. Internal strife, as we know, is often deadlier than any invader. He ordered a decree to be drafted, giving these nobles actual authority. The roles didn't need to be high, just strategically vital. Once the prince reached Nanjing, he was to immediately reorganize the guards. And as for the families traveling with them, the fewer, the better. Travel light and move quickly, he ordered, decreeing that everyone must gather at the Meridian Gate tonight. At Sun Ji's signal, the entire palace became a hive of activity. While the concubines stayed behind, their children were prepared for the journey as their mothers packed their bags. The sound of weeping filled the halls, as if this goodbye were a final parting. A heavy gloom settled over the Forbidden City. Your Majesty, Wang Qingjin whispered, gently breaking the emperor's somber trance, it is time for your meal. We follow him back to the Qianxing Palace. Sun Ji had the kitchen prepare the meal with impressive speed, and it arrived in less than 15 minutes. He sat at the square table, but he had no appetite. To save money, there was no meat, only simple vegetables. The spread consisted of roasted radishes, sautéed cabbage, stir-fried bamboo shoots, and a plate of sliced potatoes. Interestingly, in the late Ming era, potatoes were a luxury for the elite. This was served with egg soup and a bowl of rice. It was the 4 dishes and 1 soup, standard of the founding emperor. He finished the meal quickly. Once the meal was over, he looked out at the palace grounds and felt a pang of emptiness. Everything in Beijing, the very heart of the Ming dynasty, seemed to be falling into ruin. He noticed the roads were made of simple yellow earth. There was no asphalt, no stone, not even a single brick in sight. The ground was just dirt mixed with ash. We see eunuchs sprinkling water to keep the dust down as the wheels of history rolled on. These dusty roads crisscrossed the capital, showing both its ancient grandeur and its current state of decay. He chose not to ride in his ornate imperial carriage for this particular trip. Instead, he set out on foot to inspect the various imperial warehouses where the state's resources were stored. He visited the various storehouses, from the Jia to the Ding vaults, which held the empire's silver and materials. These were managed by the Ministry of Works and sat near the Aming factory, which had been rebuilt after a massive explosion in 1626. It had been moved because the previous emperor felt unsafe with it so close. But the Wanggong factory was a truly cursed place. It would even suffer another explosion in the 1950s. For now, it served as the primary storage for firearms and armor. The entire foundation of the capital's 3 major camps was stored here, as the city's defense rested solely on these firearms. These weapons were originally supplied by the Ministry of Works, but high costs and logistical nightmares eventually forced a change. At the border army's insistence, they were granted the right to manufacture their own, and honestly, who could blame them? While the ministry charged 2.5 silver taels per piece, the army could produce the same quality for half that. Minister Fan Jingwen waits at the gates with his officials, though we notice 2 men in the crowd looking particularly anxious. One is a burly middle-aged man with dark skin and a thick beard that gives him a rather fierce appearance. Despite the biting spring wind, he wears only a thin shirt with sleeves rolled up to reveal his powerful, muscular arms. Beside him stands a tall man with sun-browned skin, golden hair, and the deep-set eyes of a foreigner. Fan Jingwen leads the group in a formal greeting, but the emperor simply tells them to carry on with their duties. Most of the officials scatter quickly, as the terrifying news of the morning's court session has already reached their ears. In times like these, standing near the emperor feels like standing next to a hungry tiger. One wrong word could be the end. Fan introduces the two men as Jiao Su and Tangruo Wang, asking what instructions His Majesty has for them today. He steps aside to let the two men forward, and they bow deeply, far too terrified to even look up. After all, the emperor had just executed the Grand Secretary. For low-ranking officials like them, the fear was quite literal. He assures them he is only there to inspect the firearms, and Fan quickly leads the way toward the storage area. The weapons are kept inside the mist vault, as moving such a massive inventory out into the open is no simple task. When asked if the equipment has rusted away, Fan blushes and insists the dry air has kept everything in perfect condition. He suggests testing them in a few days, unaware that the emperor is currently fighting the urge to strike him. Realizing he has said something incredibly foolish, Fan immediately drops to his knees and begs for forgiveness. As they enter the courtyard, we see a flurry of activity as workers begin hauling the heavy firearms out from the depths. We see weapons from the Bureau of Armaments and the Palace Treasury arriving at the Mist Vault to be inspected and logged. The inventory consists mostly of fire god spears and blunderbusses, along with matching lead shot and gunpowder. Under Fan Jingwen's direction, craftsmen haul the weapons out to the Imperial Guards, who line them up before our emperor. For safety, the craftsmen aren't allowed to touch the weapons near the emperor. An accident would mean a death sentence for their entire lineage. Once the display is ready, Fan begins the tour, introducing the massive Hongyi cannon to His Majesty. He then points out the phalange cannons, giving the emperor a broad overview of the Ming Dynasty's current firepower. The Hongyi cannon was originally an import, an improved version of a Portuguese design. Modern scholars would later note that these copper-iron composite cannons were among the finest artillery pieces of the 17th century. Seeing these giants gives the emperor a small sense of security, though their weight and cost remain significant drawbacks. When asked how many are currently available, Fan reveals there are only 24 of these great red cannons in stock. It takes about half a month to manufacture just one, a timeline that is, quite frankly, far too slow for the coming storm. Realizing a total redesign is out of the question, the emperor listens as Fan moves on to hand cannons and bird guns. But then he stops and points to a specific piece, asking if it is indeed a self-generating fire blunderbuss. Fan confirms it was developed by Maokong years ago, designed to ignite without a match, though only a small batch was ever made. The emperor picks it up, noting that the internal structure is far more sophisticated than the other weapons on display. However, years of neglect have taken their toll. The metal spring is rusted through and has long since lost its tension. He realizes he is holding a flintlock, a weapon that could, in the right hands, dominate the world for the next 2 centuries. He tosses the gun back to Fan and demands to know why such a revolutionary design was never mass-produced. Fan explains that while he recognized its potential when he first joined the ministry, practical testing revealed several fatal flaws. The flint required was prohibitively expensive, and with the ministry's dwindling budget, there simply wasn't enough money to sustain it. The flaws were numerous. If the flint fell out, it wouldn't fire. If it shattered or the spring snapped, it was useless. This led the then minister, Zhang Fengxiang, to lock it away in storage, where it remained untouched. Our emperor nods, feeling a strange sense of relief. These problems, while they look, to be honest, quite daunting, are actually just the result of poor design, which makes them surprisingly easy to fix. Given enough time, a redesigned flintlock would surely allow the Ming army to sweep across the continent and make a name for itself. With the cannons finished, the other firearms are prepared for testing. He gives the order to Fan Jingwen, who leads His Majesty to the courtyard of the Armaments Bureau, as open flames are strictly forbidden near the warehouse. By the time we reach the courtyard, the Imperial Guards have already cleared the area. Aside from Fan Jingwen, the instructors, and Tangruo Wang, no other officials are present. The testing grounds are vast, with wooden stakes driven into the earth and a dense line of trees standing further back in the distance. We see wooden boards tied to small trees and straw dummies dressed in various types of armor scattered across the field. Since the Ministry of Works produces both weapons and armor, it feels a bit like they are testing their own spears against their own shields. It's a bit ironic, isn't it? Everything is in place, waiting for the signal. Once the emperor nods, Wang Qingyin directs the Imperial Guards to begin the demonstration. To protect the emperor's safety, the guards handle the firing themselves. A series of thunderous explosions erupt as the weapons are ignited one after another, quickly shrouding the entire courtyard in thick smoke. Seeing the iron armor and wooden boards pierced through, Fan Jingwen allows a smug smile to cross his face. In his mind, these are the finest weapons in the Ming Empire. He asks if the display has met His Majesty's expectations. To his surprise, the emperor simply shakes his head. It isn't enough. Fan's expression twitches. After all, these weapons represent the very best of the Ming's arsenal. Your Majesty, I don't understand, he admits, bowing his head. The Emperor counters with a question. If rebels were to besiege the city, which weapons would be used? Fan explains the strategy: cannons for long range, bird guns and phalange for the middle ground, and bows or fire tubes for those who get closer. But the Emperor points out a fatal flaw. If the enemy reaches the base of the wall, the heavy cannons are too clumsy to aim downward. What? Firearms would be left to stop them then? Fan Jingwen thinks for a moment before suggesting that muskets and hand cannons should be sufficient. The Emperor then asks if he can guarantee those weapons will pierce the heavy armor and thick shields of the rebels. Fan, of course, cannot. He snorts coldly. He isn't here for a loud show, but to find weapons that actually work when the city is under siege to maximize their power. With the Ming army's current firearms, defending the city is a lost cause. The veterans in the three great camps are aging and frail, though they at least know how to handle a weapon. As for the new recruits, even if they could be taught to fire, they wouldn't reach proficiency anytime soon. One small mistake, and they'd likely shoot their own men, which, to be honest, is the last thing they need. Friendly fire is bad enough, but hitting a gunpowder crate would be a total disaster. Seeing the Emperor's growing displeasure, Fan Jingwen begins to feel a bit anxious. He hurriedly asks if His Majesty would like to test the older, obsolete models in the warehouse. The Emperor declines, instead calling Jiaoxiu and Tang Ruowang closer. He asks in a low voice if the Ministry of Works can produce a batch of hand grenades. Fan Jingwen simply stares at Jiaoxiu in utter confusion. Jiaoxiu, just as lost, looks toward Tang Ruowang. The poor man stands there like a statue, having absolutely no idea what a hand grenade even is. After racking his brain for a moment and coming up empty, Fan Jingwen finally asks, quite humbly, what exactly a hand grenade is. We can hardly blame him for his ignorance. Our Emperor explains that they should think of it as a massive firecracker, encased in a shell of iron or filled with metal shards that scatter upon explosion. Even if the enemy wears heavy armor that the shards can't pierce, the sheer force of the blast would cause devastating internal injuries. A terrifying thought, really. He asks if they understand, and the three men share a look, silently weighing whether such a wild idea could actually work. After all, everyone knows firecrackers can be dangerous. Every new year, there are stories of children being injured by them. Fan Jingwen is the first to nod. Being well-read, he begins to form a mental image of this grenade, whose history, strangely enough, is quite long. It can be traced back to the mid-Tang Dynasty, when people first began shaping gunpowder to kill. Historical records suggest that the very earliest hand-thrown munitions appeared during the Song Dynasty, when the inventor Tang Fu presented his creations to the Emperor. Jiaoxiu is the next to snap out of his daze, bowing as he says he has a prototype in mind, though he isn't sure if it matches His Majesty's vision. Tang Ruolong finally catches on as well, realizing that he might actually know what a hand grenade is after all. He notes that if manufactured correctly, they would be incredibly effective on the battlefield. The Emperor tells him to elaborate, but Tang Ruolong hesitates. He looks toward Fan Jingwen, the Minister of Works. He knows better than to steal his superior's thunder. Fan Jingwen then speaks up. He admits he has a thought, though he isn't certain it's what the Emperor describes. He notes the process isn't hard, just a bit more tedious than making firecrackers. The Emperor asks if they can start immediately. Fan Jingwen promises to let the craftsman try, and the Emperor decides he will wait right there for the result. With the Emperor's permission, we see Fan Jingwen hurriedly leading Jiaoxiu and Tang Ruowang toward the courtyard next to the Armory Bureau. They lack neither gunpowder nor skilled craftsmen, and in less than half an hour, a remarkably short time, all things considered, the three men return.